Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. We're just going to let people keep coming until then. If anybody needs the links to the candidate surveys are on the screen right now. So please feel free to look through those. Mar, would you mind putting those links in the chat again? The links to the questionnaires. Great. Awesome. Just for anybody that's joined late, we're going to get started at 2:05. Pasting the links to questionnaires here in case anybody wants to see it in the chat. Great. If anybody has any questions, feel free to use the chat. Just a heads up to anybody who's just joining us, we're going to get started in 1 minute. The candidate questionnaires are on the screen, and they should be in the chat. If not, you can message me and I can send it to you if you need. Thanks, Mar. All right, I'm going to get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Cameron Krause, and along with Mar Fitzgerald, I'm a co-president of the Village Independent Democrats. Thank you for joining us today for the Downtown Democratic Forum for New York City Comptroller and Manhattan Borough President. We're excited to have everybody here today to hear from our candidates and press them as they see fit. I'd like to recognize some of the people in the clubs that helped put on this forum today, starting with Jamie and Tati from CODA. I'll let everybody say a few words after I call them out. So Tati's here.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Tati, the co-president of CODA, along with Jamie, who should be joining us a little bit later. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time out of your day on Sunday. And I know it's already been a pretty difficult week to hear from these candidates. And I'm looking forward to this afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next, we have Richard Corman from DID. Let me find you.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Richard Corman, president of Downtown Independent Democrats. And I think the one thing that we could say about this last week is that it focuses our attention on how important our local elected leaders are and our communities are. And so I look forward to this event and appreciate the great turnout that we're getting.
Thanks so much, Richard. Next up, we have Jeremy Sherbert from Grant Street Dems. Trying to find you, sorry. There you go.
Hey everyone, Jeremy Sherbert from Grant Street Dems. Just quickly, so glad to be a part of this. Thank you guys for arranging it, and nice to see some of my neighbors and friends.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Next, we have Patrick Kennel from New Downtown Dems.
Hi, everybody. Patrick Cannell from New Downtown Dems. Just want to thank everybody for being here. I know we're especially looking forward to this. We just completed a really informative presentation and session on ranked choice voting. So I'm excited to hear from each of these candidates and figure out how that plays into the choices I know that we're all going to have to make in a ranked way this year. So thanks again to the clubs who are leading today's forum. We appreciate it. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for the reminder about ranked choice. Next up, we have Jenny Lowe representing United Democratic Organization. Try and find you on here. Sorry, Jenny, I'm just looking for you in all the...
You found me? Hi.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see such a good turnout for this forum. Like Richard, after seeing what happened unfold in DC, we really want to focus on our local elected officials and see how they can make a difference in our everyday lives. UDO is so thrilled to join the rest of the downtown clubs hosting this forum and other forums to come. So we look forward to future collaborations with the clubs in Lower Manhattan so that we can together help build an equitable recovery for our beloved neighborhoods. So thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And then last but not least, we have Ray Klein from VRDC, Village Reform Democratic Club.
Am I muted?
You're good. Oh, you just muted yourself by accident.
Because it said, never mind. I want to welcome everyone here along with the other clubs. This is important because this pandemic has not allowed us to work in the normal fashion in which we do. So any chance we can get to see what the candidates look like, sound like, is very important. And I want to thank everyone who did all the hard work to get us here.
Thanks so much, Ray. And then I would be remiss if I didn't recognize VID's former president, David Siffert, who did a lot of legwork on behalf of VID for this forum, as we were elected after most of the work on this forum had done. So really a big thank you to David from us at VID. So the format for today, we're going to be doing 5 minutes of presentation followed by 10 minutes of Q&A, give or take. We're asking that people please limit themselves to 1 minute per question. We'll try not to cut you off if it isn't necessary, but if it comes down to it, we may need to mute you or cut you off after a minute. Besides that, we're going to be recording this meeting today. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. So please just be aware that this meeting is being recorded. And then, yeah, so Mar, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I'm very excited. Let's get started if we can.
So I'm not sure if our first candidate is here yet. State Senator Brian Benjamin, are you on this call? He's here, great.
I can't unmute him. There we go. He disappeared.
Well, as soon as State Senator Benjamin is on, we will begin with him.
Says he's not in the meeting.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
technically it's slated to start at 2:15. So for once, we actually went through quicker than we anticipated. If anybody wants to, you have a couple minutes to take a look at
Looks like he's
questionnaires.
back.
Oh, great. Excellent. There we go. Welcome, State Senator Benjamin.
Well, thank you, Cameron. I appreciate it.
Of course. So I don't know if you were on before, but we're going to do 5-minute presentation and then 10 minutes Q&A. And you are lucky number one.
You like me to start now?
Please, yeah.
Okay, sure. First of all, I want to thank all of you for hosting this forum. My name is State Senator Brian Benjamin. I am the senator for the 30th District, which encompasses Harlem, East Harlem, and a piece of the Upper West Side. I am running for New York City Comptroller, and I'm here to ask for your support. I believe that there is the overarching fundamental principle that I would want to guide my Comptroller candidacy and time in office is holding the mayor and the city of New York accountable for the billions of dollars that are spent on the city budget and safeguarding the over $230 billion pensions that right now the city of New York is responsible for. Starting on the pension front, $230 billion, there are 5 separate funds. Those funds all have to be managed. The chief investment officer of those funds is the comptroller. I'm the only candidate running in this race who has relevant investment management experience. I spent some years doing investment management and I'm very familiar with portfolio diversification, asset allocation, and I believe that I will keep those funds safe. Why is that important? Last year, in this past fiscal year, the comptroller, the funds are required to have a 7% return. If those returns aren't met, the city of New York has to invest other hard utilized dollars that can go towards other resources into supporting the pension fund. Last year, that was about 10% of the fund of the city budget. So if you look at a $90 billion budget, over $9 billion going towards pensions. That's an important issue and something that I like to manage. Secondly, I think the comptroller is responsible for holding the mayor and the city accountable. In regards to that, the NYPD to me needs a lot of management. I have been very, very forceful in saying that we need to reallocate money from the NYPD elsewhere, but I believe that there needs to be specific audits that are done from the comptroller's office to look at where is the money going, how is it being spent, what do we believe are the outcomes we're trying to generate from an NYPD budget. When we talk about what the size of the NYPD budget should be, it should be steeped in the facts of what do we need it to do. That's a programmatic conversation that we need to have as a society, and that needs to govern the conversation when we talk about what the size of that budget is. And I believe, without question, part of what has to be on the table is the NYPD is a part of our public safety plan. It is not our public safety plan. Part of our public safety plan must also include investing in our communities, investing in education, investing in economic development, particularly in communities that have been under resourced for too long. And so I can talk more about that later if you want. Thirdly, I think that we have a crisis when it comes to homelessness in this city. It's gone on for far too long. I believe through economically targeted investments, the comptroller's office can play an important role in helping to build our way out of that problem. There's 2 ways I think we should do that. Number one, I think that the comptroller should look at, through the funds, purchasing distressed hotels across the city and converting them into permanent supportive housing. We can do that. I haven't experienced in that. I used to build affordable housing. I know how the finances of that works. I believe that we can make good returns for the retirees, and at the same time provide this important and useful service. Next, on the affordable housing piece entirely, the city of New York has to have a strategic plan around our need. There are over 600,000 families that need affordable housing at economically challenged incomes. And we need to build our way into that. Our New York City housing plan does not do that. It includes preservation and it includes new construction. But if you look at the numbers, it'll take nearly 40 to 50 years in order to actually catch up with the demand we have today. That's not acceptable. And so I wanted to put that on the table for you to consider. I have experience to do those things. Let me just say quickly on my personal background. I was born right here in Harlem, very active, was very active on my community board. I built affordable housing. I've done investment management in the New York State Senate. I'm chair of the Budget and Revenues Committee, which is charged with coming up with how we're going to find the revenues to deal with our present crisis. There's a number of taxes that are on the table that I'm in charge of leading the conversations to get people familiar with and understanding. So I've been doing this job of sort of educating people on economics, educating people on how do we sort of make our finances work in a way that makes sense. And I believe I can bring all of those skills from my life on the community board, from my life as a senator, and from my life in the private sector to bear on to help make things happen. We have a $70 million budget, the Comptroller's office, over 700 staff. You have the power to audit. You have the power to register contracts, settlements, all things that I have extraordinary experience in, and I'll bring to bear on behalf of the city of New York. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Senator Benjamin. I'm gonna pass this over to Mar. She's gonna take over for the questions and answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to have 10 minutes for questions and answers with each candidate. Please use the raise hand feature. I see many of you already have. And we're going to call on you guys in the order in which you raise your hands. So first up is Dr. Gil Horowitz.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're good, Gil.
Good. The current controller is running for mayor, Senator. As you no doubt know, if you were to win the election, he would be your predecessor. What do you think he was doing right in the office of controller, and what would you do different than he is doing to make the office of controller your vision? I think that completes my question. By the way, I have a college degree in economics and a master's degree in economics. And I remember when Beam, the controller, became the mayor on the slogan, "He knows the buck." Evidently he didn't. Maybe you do. Thank you. That's my question.
No, thank you for that. And I think I didn't mention, I did go to attend at Brown University where I majored in public policy, and I went to Harvard Business School as well. To your question, I think a couple things he's done well. One is helping to sort of expose some of the issues that we have around minority and women-owned businesses having contracts and opportunities in the city of New York. It's a very big problem. Less than 5% of the city budget, and also, quite frankly, 5% of the investments under management for the controller are going to minority and women-owned businesses. There have been great sort of analysis of what those problems are, and the reports have come out. I think, and so I think that's something that's important. Also, I think he's done a very good job in terms of shareholder activism. We all believe that we should invest in fossil fuels. He has commissioned a study that is, I believe that study has been finished, just recently finished. And is going to be presented to the trustees of the 5 funds very soon to talk about how we move towards divestment from fossil fuel pension fund. And, those things I think are very important. One of the things that I would like to do is I would like to be very active, as I mentioned earlier, around 2 key fronts. The NYPD has to be held accountable. Public safety is too important. We all know how awful last year was. And part of that is because the NYPD has been running amok for too long. And people think more law enforcement means more public safety. And that's not the case. We need to audit and investigate and be very clear about what we're getting for the resources that we're spending. And then secondly, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to be very active. We have a very active approach to how we're going to get out of this homelessness crisis. And I believe $230 billion can be utilized in the right way to help move us very far along in that process. And I have a background in building affordable housing. I actually know how it works. I know where the money is in that. And I believe as comptroller, I can make the case to the trustees, because remember, the comptroller is not a sole shareholder. The comptroller has to present ideas to the 5 boards, and the 5 boards have to agree. So you need someone who actually understands what they're talking about in order to convince the trustees to go to make some of these decisions. And I will submit to you, when it comes to the fire and the police, they are very nervous when it comes to conversations around values. As some of you might be aware, the fire and the police funds did not commission the audit of, as it relates within themselves, their fossil fuels. So they're not even the conversation. It's the other 3, BERS, as well as NYCERS and the teachers. So we've got a long way to go, and I believe you need a comptroller who has the values, but then also understands the nuts and bolts of the financial analysis and financial management in order to move the ball forward.
Thank you.
Next question is going to be from, sorry, one second. Violetina Jones.
Okay, my question is, you said in terms of the homeless and hotels, I just recently read about the issue with the homeless and the hotels in terms of a particular community. And what I read was basically they had a problem with people's drug addiction and mental health. I don't know how they put it, but basically what I read, I said, this is a drug addiction and mental health problem. This is what they are complaining about in terms of the residents. So my question is, how would you deal with the drug addiction and mental health issues of the homeless population?
Sure, thank you for that question. I think obviously there's a very important role for the mayor to play here, but I do think we should be very clear in terms of where the resources are going. So many of us have heard a lot of the conversations around Thrive NYC. I can tell you many of the mental health providers in my district right here in Harlem and East Harlem who are dealing with the populations as much as anyone else all say they have not seen any of those dollars and don't understand what that was all about. That has to be audited. That has to be investigated,
Okay.
and we have to be clear about what outcomes are we trying to generate here with the money we're spending. I think unfortunately it's hard to have accountability around spending when there isn't sort of clear goals and outcomes that they're being measured against. And I think the comptroller's office can play a very important role in connecting those dots. And so for me, that's an important topic. I was very involved in the fight to sort of really try to protect some of the homeless individuals who were moved into the Lucerne Hotel on the Upper West Side during this pandemic. And one of the main reasons why I did that was because I believe, we keep passing the buck here. We're spending a significant amount of money in order to keep folks in temporary shelters, and some of them being kept there permanently. As far as I'm concerned, we should be making the transition to permanent housing. Not only is it better morally, but it's cheaper. But let me just say, to come back to your question, I'm sorry I went on a tangent, but to come on back to your question, we have got to sort of have a good sense of where all the mental health related dollars are being spent. But we do need a mayor working alongside a comptroller who are focused on the main issue, which is how are we going to move people from temporary shelter that they're in year after year after year into permanent housing where they can build their lives and grow. Particularly, don't forget, there are a number of people who are in homeless shelters who are working. They're full-time employees, and they just need a helping hand. And so, there's sort of like this view as if somehow all of these folks who are homeless are destitute and are, that kind of thing. There are a number of people who just need a helping hand, and we need to do that. We're one of the wealthiest cities in the world, if not the. We should not have a major homelessness crisis in this city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marian Rydell.
Oh, okay. Hi, how are you? Thank you for coming today. Nice
Thank you.
to meet you. I have a similar question. So I was just at a community board meeting about a safe haven that is slated to open on Orchard Street in a hotel, which I'm guessing is like the hotels you're talking about, hotels that are no longer doing well as hotels. So I have a couple of questions. One's
Sure.
programmatically, how does using hotels for supportive housing the same and differ from using them as safe havens? That's the first question. And then the second question is, how do they compare financially, economically?
Yeah, so first and foremost, is a good question. To me, one of the things that I think is relevant from the comptroller standpoint is that we have 2% of the budget that can be used, of the fund that can be used for economically targeted investments, right? And to me, there is an obvious non-expensive nexus between hotels that are already, by and large, set up in ways that can accommodate a number of individuals, particularly as we're getting out of COVID, accommodate them with space. And they have spaces that can be used for some of the supportive housing services. So there are some supportive housing operators that are interested in this conversation. Obviously, this is something that will have to be vetted and mapped out. So I want to be very clear about that. And I'm open to looking at the difference between that and safe havens, what makes most sense from a economic standpoint, from a comptroller investing standpoint, also from a city standpoint. To me, the real issue is, are we providing the necessary services to individuals that they're skilled appropriately? I mean, there are some folks who just need a permanent place to stay, and there's some folks who need a lot more targeted help. And so I think you got to sort of parse that out. I'd have a team that will be helping us to work on that. So that's something that I think we need to investigate. But to be clear, we do need to be creative here. And I think this is one of those things that we're going to have to figure out as we go, make the most practical decisions as we go. But there is, without question, given the amount of money. I mean, right now the city of New York is spending about $6,000 a month for a family to be in a temporary shelter, right? Over $3,000 for an individual. I cannot be convinced by anyone that we can't figure out a way to do that on a permanent level that's less expensive to the city, B, provides a return from a pension standpoint, and then 3, provides a better outcome to those who need the support and assistance. So that's sort of how I'm looking at this. Obviously, there's more details that would need to get vetted out in terms of what makes most sense. So I think that's something to TBD, but I do think this is the direction we need to be moving in. We need to be more activist about it. It's a public pension fund. That's not a private pension fund. Public pension funds should protect the retirees, but also have a public benefit. And I think that this is the kind of topic that we use to figure that out.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're actually just about at time at 2:30. So if you have questions that have not been asked or answered, please submit them to us via email or put them in the chat, and we will forward them to the candidate and campaign, and they will follow up with you. Our next candidate is Kevin Parker, Senator Kevin Parker. Cam, can you unmute him? Bring him forward.
Good afternoon. Happy Sunday.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. There will be 5 minutes for statement and then 10 minutes for Q&A.
Perfect.
Would you like to get started?
Yes, ma'am. So one, let me just say thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to address you all today. I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn. I'm the majority whip in the New York State Senate, as well as I'm the majority whip in the state Senate, as well as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And I'm running for City Comptroller, and would love to have your endorsement. And I'm running for City Comptroller because I think that in this time in which the city is fighting for literally the lives of its residents, as well as the livelihoods of its residents, you need somebody with experience, knowledge, and understanding of the system, but more importantly, the vision of how to lead us forward at this moment. I've spent my life working in public service, starting out working for Ruth Messenger when she was the Manhattan Borough president. Worked with Una Clark when she was a city council member in the city council. Worked for the first governor, Governor Cuomo. Worked on Hillary's first campaign. Worked for Carl McCall, but also spent some time on Wall Street at UBS, paying Weber, doing government affairs and municipal finance work before I got elected in 2002. And since I've been in the Senate, I've been on the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, either as the ranking member or the chair of the Energy and the ranking or the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. In that 18 years, I spent 18 years on the Finance Committee, over a decade on the Banking Committee, over a decade on the Insurance Committee, and really has made understanding the budget and understanding how we move this state forward and this city forward, my stock in trade. And I really just want to kind of bring that experience to the table. But I also bring to the table, I think, an experience of parents who were union workers, being a kid who went to public school my entire life, PS 193 Huddy and Midwood High School, and really just, having been on the ground and working with people in the community, and kind of knowing what people, care about. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We're not going to tax our way out of this crisis. I think that it's going to be important that we get another stimulus from the federal government. It's going to be important that we tax the ultra millionaires, but New Yorkers don't want to hand out, they want to hand up. And really, we have an economy that's moved from Wall Street to Main Street. And we really have to build small businesses to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits, particularly because of labor market discrimination. You're not going to put back the literally millions of Blacks, Latino, Asians, and women who've been unemployed through this crisis, no fault of their own, by simply just doing what we've always done. We have to use the pension fund in a very important way. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And so we certainly have to grow the pension fund and make sure that it's stable. I think that there's no real dichotomy between that and responsible investing that reflect the values of the people of the city of New York. But we can also use that pension fund to invest in funds that invest in New York businesses. Access to capital, technical assistance of what they need. I want to use the office to, in fact, bring more small business development centers around so we can provide that technical assistance to build up businesses in our Main Street, get people back to work. That is the sure way to prosperity in the city. Day one, I want to put together an economic justice council of business leaders, labor leaders, community leaders, clergy leaders, to start helping, working together to build a way forward. I will, audit the police department for the first time and make sure that we make the police department continue to protect and serve every single New Yorker, but do so in a way that's transparent, that provides accountability, and does it with dignity and respect. And I also want to make sure that we invest in our young people. I think it's critical that we do that. And I think there's a lot of ways that will help improve the quality of life. We should not be putting some of youth employment jobs on the chopping block first. We should expand, expand youth-based, school-based athletics for our young people. And we should certainly be making sure that we have the kind of after-school programs that's actually universal. We've done universal pre-K. It's now important to do universal after school to make sure our young people are engaged, and that will decrease the amount of gang activity, which will increase the amount of crime and violence that we're seeing in our communities as well. And so I think there's lots to be done. Can't wait to not just hear your questions, but to work with you as your new city controller and hear your ideas and build the kind of coalitions and bridges that we need in order to see our city go further. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Senator Parker. The first question will come from Lynn Ellsworth. She's having trouble raising her hand on our computer, so she reached out to me.
Hey, Lynn.
Try and find her. Sorry, you're muted. Let me unmute you right now. There you go. Oops, sorry.
Does that work now?
Yeah, you're good.
Hi. Just a comment before I jump into my question is that, I'm literally a normal middle-class person, but I live in a neighborhood that's become incredibly wealthy. I now pay $28,000 a year in property taxes.
Wow.
Can't afford it.
Yeah.
And moreover, our building is so valued that we're told we have to pay that amount up front at the beginning of the year. So people in our building are going into debt to pay their real estate taxes. Just saying, we have some ridiculously wealthy people here. I'm just not one of them. So we're at a very limit of what we can do with real estate taxes in the city. So my question really had to do with school and education. We live near Stuyvesant High School, which is gorgeous, beautiful, a most amazing facility. And, you know, I've been traveled throughout the city, and I've been in high schools in many other neighborhoods that are just inexcusably shabby and run down and have no facilities in them. And I'm like, what's with the equity and the distribution of resources among high schools in the entire system? And I wonder, does the controller have a role in highlighting those inequities and making proposals to fix them from a fiscal point of view?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that, you know, that's been 100% of the problem, right? I've been somebody who has fought from the time I've gotten to the state legislature on the issue of CFE, right? And making sure that we pay out the money around the campaign for fiscal equity, right? That some of that money is still owed. But the real problem is, you know, frankly, over the last 10 years, we have been a state that has put more money per pupil into education than any other state in the history of the United States, right? And so money is there. The problem that we have is that the city of New York, which is seen from a state perspective as one school district, right? Even though like those of us who are in the city talk about our internal school districts, from the state perspective is seen as one school district. We have a equality formula instead of an equity formula. We really need an equity formula that puts the most money into the schools that need it the most, right? And that's one of the things that that I think that can be done through the city controller's office, and certainly working in concert with the mayor's office to do that kind of work. And I think that's the beginning of it. And I think that we have to continue. One of the things I've always said is that the city controller's office is really one of the only offices on kind of the city level that can't pass legislation. I really want to continue to have a strong legislative affairs office, and to continue to you know, work with, you know, my colleagues in the state level, my colleagues in the city council, with the governor, and obviously with the mayor, to pass legislation that's going to benefit the city. And I think this is one of the areas that absolutely needs to happen.
Thanks, Senator Parker.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I was say next up is Scott Kaplan.
Senator, could you comment on the Daily News story from 3 days ago indicating that one of your colleagues and co-candidates, Senator Benjamin, is receiving up to $50,000 in outside income as a board member of a company led by a Wall Street executive connected to the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis? Should state legislators receive outside income at all, and do you? Thank you very much.
So I don't receive outside income. I think that it's okay if state legislators receive outside income if it's, as it is now, approved through the ethics panel and JCOPE. And so there are kind of procedures and policies and entities that overlook those kind of things, and we all, you know, submit a financial disclosure form every year that is public information. And so I think that is a both a function of those entities and the voters to decide whether those things are appropriate or not.
Thank you, Senator Parker. Next up, we have Bill Ferns. Sorry, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi. So thank you. My question has to do with, I'm not sure how familiar with it, but there's a project in our area, the East River Park. There's a big development project. There was a community, there was a proposal from the community, or with a lot of community input that a lot of people liked. About a couple of years ago, the mayor threw out that proposal to replace it with like a $1.5 billion proposal that would tear up the park for 5 years. And he based it on something called the Engineering Value Report, which it just was reported a couple of days ago. That report didn't exist. So I know you're not the controller yet, but you do have some influence in Albany. Do you think you could get the legislature to intercede, or the governor, who we know likes to interfere with the mayor, to put a halt to this boondoggle and to go back to the original plan? Thank you.
Bill, that is the best question I've gotten in the entire time that I've been through this process. I promise to look into it. I have to learn a little bit more about it, but I promise that I'll get back to you, and we'll figure out how to start to address it. I think there's a lot of moving parts that relate to that, but certainly I think there's lots of probably creative ways that that not just you have, but I'm sure that my colleagues in government who represent that community have, and I certainly would want to check in with them and work collaboratively with them as we address that.
Thank you, Senator Parker. Just so you guys are aware, there's 3 more minutes. Kathy Nazari, you're next.
Thank you. Hi, Senator Parker.
Hey, Kathy.
Would you consider having your office administer the pensions of all tax-paying New Yorkers who would want your office to do that?
Absolutely. I think that would be a fantastic opportunity, particularly to build wealth over time. If it was something that we could legally do and we could develop a mechanism to do that, absolutely. My sense is that it may be something we can do if you think about something like the state controller does around the 529 plan for colleges, right? So, I mean, so yes, so let's look at it. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Melissa Carty. Melissa, are you still there? Trying to get you on mute.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I just had a question, Senator Parker, on your plans for supporting minority-owned businesses with the pensions, and also, you know, your support for divestiture on, you know, like fossil fuels, and how you plan to go about that.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. That's a great question. So first, look, I think that the support that has to happen in this city for small businesses have to happen to every small business, right? Like, you know, MWBEs and traditional, you know, majority-owned businesses, right? All need the help, both financially and, you know, in terms of access to capital and access to technical assistance. So, but I think that obviously has to be some, you know, some specific attention paid to, you know, to women and minority-owned businesses, and to, you know, yeah. And then we also have to look at the MWBE program, because even in a year in which there's a budget hole, right? I don't want people to fall into the Dunkin' Donuts maneuver, right? Y'all know what that is, right? Everybody looks at the hole, nobody pays attention to the donut, right? So even in the year in which there may be a $5 billion deficit, the city of New York is still going to spend $90 billion. Over $20 billion is still going to be contracted out. We still need to make sure that Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and women get access to those contracting opportunities. And that if we're going to say we're going to pay people on 90-day terms, they get paid in 90-day terms, not on 120, because those are the kind of things that kill small businesses in general, and Black and Latino and women-owned businesses in particular. And so that kind of work needs to happen. I also, again, we have a pension fund that, you know, when you look at all 5 of them, is $225 billion. Less than 2% of those businesses that are investing that money are owned by Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and women. We have to change that. Other people need to have opportunities to invest that money and bring that money into that income into the city. And we need to invest our pension money in funds that are investing in businesses that are in New York City, right? We just can't be investing all over the place. And I mean, you know, where it makes sense, great. But there's a lot of opportunity in the greatest city in the world, in the largest city in the country, to make good, sound investments. And we need to find funds that are doing that here in New York City and invest in them to do that work. As it relates to, you know, transitioning in terms of the clean energy economy, I'm the only expert in this field on that. I've spent 18 years on the Energy Committee. I'm the longest serving legislator currently serving who's been on the Energy Committee. The whole time I've been either the ranker or the chairman. I help negotiate the CLCPA. I think that is a lot of nuance that has to happen here. So for instance, take National Grid. National Grid is a large utility-owned firm. They do a lot of gas. I know people are against carbon and against gas. I see gas as a bridge fuel. I don't think that's going to last forever. But you can't throw away, you can't kind of have the cancel National Grid because they do gas, because National Grid is also the largest sustainable energy producer in the entire state. And so we got to look at it state by state, company by company, investment by investment, and deal with it in a nuanced way. And as we build towards this clean energy economy, right? And then simultaneously make sure that we're, again, making sure that Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and women are involved in that. And I think as an investor, we could be activists with those companies, with utilities, with those organizations that are doing this work to make sure that we're more moving in the right direction, which is consistent with the values of the people of the city of New York.
Thank you, Senator Parker.
Thank you.
I have a few questions that came from the gallery that we'll send over to your team via email.
Great. Can't wait to answer them.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Oops, sorry, I muted you. Next up, we have Assemblyman David Weprin. How are you doing today? In case you weren't on before, there's going to be 5 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, great. I'm Assemblyman David Weprin. I'm running for controller because I really feel I can contribute to rebuilding New York City and to the future of New York City. Just to give you my background, I'm a son of a Cuban Jewish immigrant who came here when she was 8 years old in 1938. She'll be 91 in April, and she became a teacher, and she was active in UFT, and she actually has a teacher's pension that she's relying on, that she's been living off of to a certain extent. And she keeps asking me if I'm controller, am I going to protect that pension? And of course, the answer is yes. I also feel during this current pandemic fiscal crisis, where we have probably the worst fiscal crisis ever in the history of the city of New York, the 1975 fiscal crisis, the post 9/11 fiscal crisis, when I came into the city council, and the 2008 recession fiscal crisis. This is going to be worse than all of them put together. And we potentially have a $12 billion deficit in the city. And I believe my background, both in public finance as well as in the public sector, as well as the private sector, is going to be very relevant information. I chaired the finance committee of the city council from 2002 through 2009. I came in after 9/11 with a multi-billion-dollar deficit. I played a part in transferring that becoming a surplus. Then we had another multi-billion-dollar deficit after 2008 recession. We turned that around when I left the city council at the end of 2009. We had a surplus. So I'm proud of that record. I've been in the assembly since 2010. I've chaired the corrections committee for the last 4 years. And we've done a lot of correction reform in the state, very progressive legislation, and I'm proud of that record. I also have served on the Ways and Means Committee in the Assembly most of my tenure. I'd be happy to answer questions. I don't know if I'm over my 5 minutes, but I saw you looking at your watch, so.
You're only about 2 minutes. Our first question will be from Grace Price. Grace?
Hi, sorry, I wanted to ask a question of Senator Benjamin. I apologize.
Okay. We will move on to Pete Davies. Pete?
Hi, yes, thank you for joining us. This is a question about rezonings. Since subzonings and the granting of increased FAR to property owners are essentially a granting of monetary value, but ULURP has no requirement for analysis of economic basis of a city-sponsored rezoning action, what would you do to make transparent the upzoning transactions that are put forward by way of city planning land use applications? And do you support the community-based planning plan for Soho NoHo? Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question. I think we should have more transparency, no question. And I think we should be looking at the economic impact. again, when I was in the city council, I chaired the finance committee, not the land use committee, and I was not as involved in that issue. But I think it's certainly something that we should be looking at. And I think it's important to have significant community input, but even more importantly, knowing what the economics are and the economic impact. But there's no question that we need more transparency.
Thank you. Our next question is from Annie Wilson.
Hi there, thank you. I had to configure the unmute. I'm here and I'm asking about the audits and the potential of audits by the controller regarding HPD and HPD, which has many various contracts, as public-private partnerships. Would you, as controller, be willing to audit the HPD public-private partnerships for the past 10 years? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think the audit function is underutilized by many controllers, by the current controller as well as previous controllers. Right now, every single New York City agency is audited once every 4 years. That should really be annual. And I think we need more personnel, obviously, when the budget allows it, to help in audits, because that's a very, very important function of the controller, which has been underutilized. That is a way to check on the mayor, whoever that mayor is. That is a check on city agencies. And there is so much waste in city agencies, particularly when you're dealing with outside contracting budgets. For example, the Department of Ed probably has the largest contracting budget. That money could be used for teachers and support personnel to actually provide teaching in our classrooms during normal times as well as during the pandemic. And I think we should significantly audit those billions and billions of dollars in outside contracting budget. So yes, the use that you mentioned of previous public-private partnership should also be audited, and I would certainly support that.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Joyce Holland. Joyce?
Hi, I'm sorry. Hello, Mr. Weprin. I just wanted to find out, what significance do you think the small property owners have in this city? And what would you do to support them? Thank you.
Well, I've supported small property owners. We've been, when we're doing this Recovery Act due to COVID-19, I think we have to take into consideration, and we expanded along with the protecting tenants, protecting small property owners. And I played an input in that because, it's one thing to help tenants, who are really in need, and that's very important. But at the same time, small property owners have to make their payments. They have to make their mortgage, and we don't want them to go bankrupt either. And they're an important part of the tax base of New York City. I'm less worried about these multi-billion-dollar landlords and ones that have multiple properties and large properties, either commercial or residential. I'm more concerned about the small property owner who really has to make ends meet, and we have to make sure that that they're protected as well.
Thank you. Our next question is going to be from Jan Lee. Jan?
Hi, it's nice to see you again, Assembly Member. Thank you.
Hi, Jan.
We have a question about the budget and about the power to audit from the controller. Are you comfortable with the current budget for the borough-based jails that seems to be an ever-moving target? And if you were to be controller, would you call for an audit of that moving into this next era with the new mayor and a new city budget? Would you be calling for an audit for the borough-based jail project, which is $8.5 billion? Thank you.
Well, I think we should be auditing, every agency once a year, as I mentioned with the previous question. But I certainly think there should be an audit. Right now, just knowing what I know, I would support that because I think it's important to close Rikers Island. And there are a lot of, safety issues that are occurring in Rikers Island. I actually chair the corrections committee at the state level, which also has oversight over city, local jails, and statewide local jails as well as state. So I think audits are good. It doesn't mean we're going to discover anything that's going to jeopardize anything, but at the same time, audits and transparency is always good. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jenny Lowe.
Hello, Assembly Member. Good to see you here.
Hi, Jenny, and good luck to you on your potential candidacy or future candidacy.
Thank you, thank you. With the past few candidates who have spoken, we were asking about them questions on how do they plan to help minority women-owned businesses. Having been a small business lender and lending to them, I know how difficult it is for minority women-owned businesses to first get certified and then get business, right? So one of the questions my question is really have to do with how do you help those whose primary language is not English? The city's local law 30 requires that the city agencies translate material into 10 different languages. So would you please help me understand how your comptroller will be able to help that?
Yeah, I've been a very strong advocate for language access and translating into multiple languages. I have one of the most diverse districts in my assembly district in the state, and I also had a very diverse city council district when I chaired the finance committee of the city council for 8 years. So there's no question that language access should be a major priority. It always has been, and I've had numerous pieces of legislation over the years. 60% of my constituents in the assembly, 60%, because overall in Queens, it's over 50%, but 60% of my constituents are first generation born in other countries. I have a particularly large South Asian and Asian population, probably about over 35% of my assembly district, and language access has always been an issue, and I would certainly advocate for more language translation. I've been a strong advocate for MWBE programs and access, for African American, Latino, Asian, and women-owned businesses, and having an opportunity to various contracts. I've always argued that, and will certainly continue to argue that as New York City Controller.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member Weprin. We are just about at time. So I think we will move on. Cam, do you want to take over?
Sure.
Can I just say that I would love to have your endorsements or any combination of your endorsements. I think your reputation as downtown Democratic clubs are well known throughout the city, and I'd be honored to have your endorsement.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman Weprin. Next up, we're going to have Councilmember Brad Lander. Once I can find him on here. There we go. You should be unmuted now, Councilmember.
Great, I'm here. You ready for me?
Oh, yeah. So just
Dynamite.
5-minute presentation, 10 minutes Q&A.
Super. Well, thank you so much. This is an amazing crowd of people. It's really great to have so many people here from this fantastic set of clubs, from CODA, DID, Grand Street Dems, New Downtown Dems, UDO, VID, and VRDC. It means a lot that 165 people are giving up yet another couple of hours on even one more Zoom. It really signals like a deep commitment to local democracy. Obviously, it has been quite a week, one that clearly showed some of the very worst, most horrific of American politics in that white supremacist insurrection. But it also showed some of the very best with that win in Georgia, where organizing led by Black women elected a Black preacher and a Jewish son of immigrants and point the way forward for our country. So I want to start by saying a big thank you to everyone on this call who organized to help elect Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Reverend Warnock, and John Ossoff. Grassroots organizing made those wins possible, and they point the way forward, not just for our country, but for our city as well, to get through this crisis. So I'm excited to be here to share my vision for the Comptroller's Office in the hard and important years ahead. I've enjoyed getting to know many of you over the past 25 years. Before I entered politics, I had a 15-year career in community development and community planning, running two great nonprofit organizations, the Fifth Avenue Committee in Brooklyn and the Pratt Center for Community Development, supporting community-based planning in all 5 boroughs, saving neighborhood commercial strips, supporting environmental justice fights. And I got to work with many of you, some of the folks in CODA through the Sons of the Seward Park Urban Renewal Effort Coalition, fighting for tenants' rights and strengthening the rent laws, and really trying to build a city from the ground up, rooted in the vision and voice of communities. In the past 10 years, I've served in the city council where I've brought that community planning perspective and led some big fights. Just recently, after a 2-year campaign, the council passed my bill to protect fast food workers from unfair firing with just cause employment protections. That comes from work on the Fight for 15, a fair work week, paid sick days, and it's alongside work to give better worker protections to Uber and Lyft drivers, to car wash workers, and to protect freelancers from wage theft. I've written and passed legislation to create strong tenant protections, hold reckless drivers accountable, ban plastic bags, implement participatory budgeting, and strengthen our campaign finance laws. And I've been one of the leading voices in the fight for citywide comprehensive planning to replace our piecemeal and reactive approach to development with a long-term strategic vision informed by real public input and ensuring a fair distribution of growth. And in all of that work, I've fought to make government work better, both by working closely with activists and community leaders like you and taking a good hard look at the data. That's the approach we're going to need from the next comptroller if we're going to rise to the daunting challenge of securing a just and durable recovery, getting the vaccine distributed for all New Yorkers. I just came from a first-day visit to one of the 24/7 vaccine hubs in Sunset Park, helping the millions of struggling families who can't pay the rent, supporting our small businesses, and rebuilding our economy. We face a severe budget crisis that requires making hard choices, and I've made those hard choices as a member of the council. But we also know from Keynesian economics that we have to make smart city capital investments in long-term rebuilding. Out of past crises, New York's leaders pioneered investments in the subways, CUNY, Mitchell-Lama, that were the platform for equitable growth and success for over a century. We can and must do the same today, with investments in clean energy to mitigate and prepare for the climate crisis, in culture and the arts, in affordable and supportive housing, in our neighborhoods, in sustainable innovation to bring our city back to life and create hundreds of thousands of good green jobs. But all of that requires that we make government work better, because government can't deliver on any of those promises when city agencies are run poorly, when money's wasted, when results aren't clear, when projects aren't completed on time, when there's no accountability for mismanagement, and when corruption goes unchecked. And I'm running for comptroller to help our city rise to those challenges. The tools of the comptroller's office, making sure we're spending our dollars smarter, investing public pensions responsibly, auditing agencies to make them work more effectively. These tools can help us confront our biggest challenges: economic recovery, the affordable housing crisis, public safety, and especially since the comptroller is charged with taking the long-term view on our city, the climate crisis. That's why I've released detailed policy platforms on my website you can check out. And I'm really enthusiastic to have the opportunity to be here with you today to seek your support and talk about our shared future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. So our first question is from Marissa Redanti. Marissa?
Hi, Brad. I'm sorry. Here we go. Hi, Brad. It's Marissa Redanti. Nice to see you.
Great to see you, Marissa.
Hi, we up in Hell's Kitchen. I'm the district leader here. We have a lot of shelters, hotels turned shelters, and what I'm finding is that the providers are not all equal. In other words, Black Veterans for Social Justice is terrific. Acacia, not so great. I understand the mayor has control of these contracts, where usually the comptroller would be able to review these contracts, because I think these nonprofits are getting paid and not doing their job. So could you address that, please? Because it's so frustrating, because they're not doing their work. They're not providing services. They're not, and it's not fair to the residents. It's not fair to the community either.
Yeah. Marisa, it's a great point. I've worked on this a little more actually around foster care and adoption, because parents came to me, foster care adoptive parents came to me and said, there's a big difference between different agencies.
Yes.
Shouldn't there be an ability for people to know which ones are gonna fight for them, support them, help them do well? And right now you can't do that. The city obviously is collecting information on who's effective and who's not effective, on who provides good services and uses money effectively, but it doesn't share that information with the public enough. I think that's true across a lot of the areas where we contract for services. And it is a good role for the comptroller, because the audit power the comptroller has not only covers city agencies, it covers contracts as well. And that's better done systematically, where if you use data the city already has to give information on those contractors rather than have to go one at a time. But as comptroller, I would join in that effort. That's the whole point of auditing. It's the whole point of contracting, to make sure we're getting the quality services that are needed all around. The folks in those homeless shelters need them. If we're going to convert them to supportive housing, we have to do it with groups that can do that job well. And the neighborhood and the public absolutely has a right to know.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kathy Slowinski. Kathy?
Sorry, my question was for David Weprin. So.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Kathy. We will take a question from Eric Hamilton. Eric, are you with us? Okay, Lynn, you've been unmuted. Eric will do you right after.
Sure, Brad, I've been reading the legislation that I know you supported, that Corey Johnson calls Planning Together. And I noticed that high opportunity, well-resourced neighborhoods in Vicki Bean's report are referred to as neighborhoods that have high transit, good schools, good parks, and good grocery stores. And I see that in the legislation, it's the director of the new mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning will be required to prioritize population growth in areas that have high access to opportunity and low risk for displacement. So from my understanding of Bean's report, that kind of means the historic core south of 125th Street, downtown Brooklyn, the East River waterfront. Could you explain that?
Sure. Well, I guess let me do it from my... Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess let me do it from my own neighborhood's perspective, because I'm sitting here with a view out over the Gowanus Canal from where I am, and I've been working with neighbors in and around the Gowanus Canal, sort of the neighborhood in between Park Slope and Carroll Gardens, for a decade, to try to figure out a way that we can make that neighborhood more inclusive. There is opportunity there to create affordable and mixed income housing, but in a way that's grounded in neighborhood voice and vision, that preserves what makes Gowanus creative and funky, that supports arts and artisan and light manufacturing and small businesses, while we also make some room to have more neighbors in this community. So, I guess what I think is we do want a comprehensive planning process. We haven't had it. And as a result, everything that moves is proposed by a developer or proposed by a mayor who kind of feels like they're throwing darts, like a place they want to go next, and not a place that's grounded in what do we think makes sense for the city. So the idea of comprehensive planning is that you start with a set of questions. How much additional housing do we think we need? What are the areas where we actually want to grow jobs? What are the most important things to preserve about our city? How do we prepare for the climate future that we're facing? And given that set of priorities, try to make some decisions. If we think X amount of growth is needed, how do we distribute it fairly in ways that are rooted in adequate infrastructure, or invest in new infrastructure where that's going to have to be needed? So equity is going to have to be one of those principles coming through the COVID crisis. I think shines a light on when you have a city this segregated, you leave people vulnerable, and we have to have a city that's got room for everyone. And that does better at investing in all our neighborhoods. So equity is going to be a core principle, but the whole idea of comprehensive planning is to create a process that says, all right, here's the big picture things that are going on in the city. Here are the trends. The comptroller's got a special role in saying, here are the economic trends. Here's the status of the infrastructure. Here's how we need to think about the capital budget. And then let's have a dialogue across neighborhoods and try to figure out what aren't always going to be easy questions, but we can't do them worse than we're doing now with this reactive process that is developer driven without either a citywide vision that we all participate in or meaningful input for neighborhoods. And I do think a comprehensive planning process is the right way to do it. That bill is just a starting point. So if folks have feedback on it, I'd love to hear it. I'm pretty sure a comprehensive planning process is the way to move forward. Exactly how we do it and what it looks like is the dialogue we want to have.
Thank you. I might ask, if you've already asked a question of any candidate, please make room for others to have the same opportunity. And if your question is or was for a different candidate, please lower your hand. Our next question is from Eric Hamilton.
Hi, sorry, my name is Eric Dillenberger. That was a typo. I don't even know how that happened. So my question for Mr. Landers, the August 3rd, 2020 Controller's Office Executive Summary stated that due to COVID economic devastation, New York City is projected to have a budget shortfall of $543 million in 2021, $4.84 billion in 2022, and $3.59 billion in 2023, for a three-year total of approximately $8.97 billion. Coincidentally, this shortfall of $8.97 billion is about $500 million more than the projected $8.4 billion price tag allocated as necessary for the Borough Jail initiative to close Rikers Island, which you were a vocal supporter of. I'd like if you can explain how you expect to fund this initiative in the face of this deficit, while still maintaining public safety with upward spiraling murder and shooting rates in communities of color, and not cut basic city services.
Thanks for the question, Eric. Obviously, the city's fiscal future and the crisis we're facing is a day one job of the folks that are coming in next. Now, I will say you can't use capital dollars to pay operating deficits. So that would be true for any project in the capital budget. You're not allowed to take money, whether it's for the borough-based jails or whether it's for roads or whether it's for affordable housing, and use it to fill operating deficits to cover what we need to pay our teachers and our firefighters and our public hospital system. And I will say the situation is a little less dire. We actually just got some good information from the Independent Budget Office that property tax receipts and other revenues are up a little bit, but we face a devastating crisis. So step one was what happened this week in Georgia, because we need adequate federal relief for states and cities, and that was only going to happen with a Democratic Senate. So everybody here who made phone calls to Georgia, you not only helped save our democracy, you helped put New York City in a better position to meet its fiscal challenges, because getting state and city relief from the federal government is by far the most important thing. And now we've got a chance at it. It's not going to close the whole gap, but it will make a big difference. You know, I don't know if you talk to your public school principals, but most of them just got told they owe money because their registers are down. There's no way our schools can fill this gap. So the federal government's got to provide it. Second, I support proposals in Albany to provide for progressive revenue, closing the loophole on carried interest for hedge fund and private equity managers or taxing billionaires so that we could fund excluded workers. And then at the city level, we do have some hard choices to make. There are some programs that we had to cut. You know, I want to get to zero waste in our city, so I have fought hard to expand the composting program, but I supported its suspension during this crisis because it was the kind of thing we had to suspend to be able to get through our operating crisis. we are going to have at least one and probably two more budgets where we have to make hard choices on the operating budgets. We can do that without cutting essential services, but it's painful to cut things that are important, like moving towards zero waste. And then finally, on that capital budget, and we could debate what projects it should be, but if you know your Keynes, if you think about what it is that helps you get through a crisis, to create jobs, grow your economy when you're in hard times, investing in capital projects that bring a future on which you can build your economy. And at this point, it seems clear to me the climate crisis is the #1 place to look at. Massive amounts of rooftop solar, getting our city ready for the climate crisis. We can do that in a way that creates good green jobs now, that's built from the capital budget, not from the operating budget, but helps us grow an economy for the future. And that's how I think we're going to have to face the fiscal crisis in a way that not only meets our budget deficits, but helps grow a more equal and vibrant future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brad. We are at time. And that is going to conclude our Comptroller section. All of you who have questions, please email them, put them in the chat. We will make sure that the candidates and their campaigns get them so they can follow up with you. Thank you. And so now we are going to pass it over to Coda, who will host this portion.
Thanks, Mar. Can I just want to make sure, mic check. I'm good and audible?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Jamie Rogers, co-president of CODA, along with Tatiana Jorio, who's also on. And we're going to roll right in to the borough president. Same rules apply. We have 15 minutes broken up between a speech and questions. We're going to take the questions in the order in which you raise your hand. Please only raise your hand for the candidate that is currently speaking. So we're going to move first to Elizabeth Caputo. So let me see if I can find her. Any of my co-hosts, if you find her before me and unmute her, you can go ahead and take that initiative with all these folks on here. Great. Okay, Elizabeth, if you want to begin, I'll start the clock.
I'm happy to say a quick hello to everyone and really grateful for your time. Jamie, I know we both served. I did a little longer, but I was the chair of Community Board 7 at a time when you were a community board chair as well. So want to thank, again, CODA. I want to thank Downtown Independent Democrats, Grand Street Democrats, New Democratic, all the New Democratic clubs who have joined today. I have known you throughout my entire adult life, largely through my leadership of DL21C, as well as my community board leadership. So grateful for a few minutes to talk to you about why I'm so excited about being your next Manhattan Borough President. So just a little bit about me, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions this afternoon. I have called New York and Manhattan my home my entire adult life for over 25 years, and I bring over 2 decades of experience to serving this city. I have really lived and breathed Manhattan through its toughest days, living and working here throughout 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, Hurricane Sandy, and now what we arguably all know is one of the biggest challenges of all of our lives, which is the global pandemic here in the city where we've been at the epicenter. At every one of those moments, I have really worked to bring Manhattan communities together, and really looking forward to bringing my commitment and energy to local government as we recover and rebuild. I'm a problem solver at heart, and I know what it takes to lead New York City. I bring an extensive background in municipal finance, having worked full-time while running civic organizations. Those were local infrastructure projects for the city and the country. And I'm the longest serving chair of Manhattan Community Board 7. So I really feel very qualified and ready to lead Manhattan. The reason I'm running is because we need strong, innovative leadership right now. I believe strongly, as much as I am a great fan and friends of many of the people who are running for this job, that we need new leadership. It's time for qualified new executive leadership, whether it's been on the pandemic, on schools opening and closing, restaurants, economic development, social, racial, gender inequality. I do not believe that our career politicians have brought the forward thinking and actionable ideas that we need to get us through this. So as Manhattan Borough President, I'm going to work to get our city back on track and return our borough to what it has been to many of us, and what I call, in a very spirited way, the core of the Big Apple. So I'm all in. I'm all in for Manhattan. And now more than ever, I believe, again, that our city just needs qualified new leadership. My entire career has been about building bridges. I mentioned before that I've worked in municipal infrastructure finance. I've chaired Manhattan Community Board 7. I've run a very large citywide grassroots civic organization where we've hosted many events down in your neighborhood over the years, even though I represent the Upper West Side. I've been downtown many, many years. I worked down there, and I also have spent a significant amount of time hosting events for DL21C there. And I currently work at an international organization that connects US cities to the world. And I believe that's something that I wanted to highlight today for all of you, is that I think we're a global city and a world-class city, and we need world-class leadership for it. And that's exactly what I've done in my day job every day when I work for a living at the World Economic Forum. So my final thoughts before I just sort of go to answer questions, and I'm happy to talk about sort of very specific neighborhood issues and sort of what I've done during my time as community board chair. But I've really brought people together. And I think whether it's affordable housing, transit, sanitation, public schools, reviving our restaurants and nightlife, bringing back arts and culture. Those are things throughout the borough that in order to bring people and our friends and neighbors back to this borough, we need to focus on. And we need to also find innovative, humane solutions, not just press ops, to address the homelessness crisis and keep this borough a place where everyone is included. So again, I'll just say again that I think we're at a crossroads and we're feeling it. I've been traveling everywhere throughout the crisis, on the subways, on buses, walking, biking, Inwood, Battery Park City, every neighborhood in between. And I just believe very strongly that our greatest strength is in the energy and diversity of our people. And I am really ready, and after 25 years living and working here, to channel all my experience, bridging, really being a bridge between global and local and public and private, to be your champion for the city and borough we all love. So I'm happy to answer specific questions and talk a little bit more about my accomplishments and the work I did while I was a community board chair locally. But again, I'm really grateful to all of you for your time today on a Sunday afternoon, and would very much appreciate learning more about all you're doing and how I can serve you and making this borough the best it can be. And I'd love your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We'll go again through the stack of raised hands. First is Kelly Grace Price.
Sorry, it was for the last candidate again. I'll unraise my hand.
All right, Ben Yee. Ben, you there? All right, we'll call on Ben after Marianne Rydell.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. Oh, go ahead, Ben. I'll go after you.
No, sorry. My question was actually had been for Brad Lander, so I'll lower my hand. Sorry about that.
Come on, Ben. Don't you want to? I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Like, we've known each other a long time. So
We have,
if you
but
have a
I'll leave it to
question,
somebody else.
feel free.
Should
Again,
I go?
I should mention that I've worked with a lot of you all in the political sphere. I believe very strongly that this job is a non-ideological one for borough president and requires an executive leader, not necessarily a legislative one. And I've done that my entire life. So just wanted to add that in.
Cool.
Okay, can I go?
Marianne, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Hi, how are you doing? Good to see you again. My question has to do with the building, the kind of quandary of building affordable housing without building glass-faced high-rises that are ruining neighborhoods, that are ruining the texture of neighborhoods. We're seeing it in NoHo, Soho, but we're seeing it here. So, here's where I live in the Lower East Side, Chinatown, Lower East Side. There's a plan from the Chinatown Working Group that is a rezoning plan that really keeps zoning central to the blocks on which the buildings are going to be developed. So I just want to know what you think about limiting heights while still building affordable housing?
Look, I mean, I've said consistently throughout my campaign, it's a really good question, and thank you for asking it. You know, I believe in a couple things when it comes to rezonings. One is that, you know, we do have to think about developing up as opposed to developing out in an island like Manhattan. And I'm just going to be honest about that. But I think in all of my public comments and my priority from my time on the community board has been conscientious towards the environmental, racial, and economic concerns of the neighborhood. I also believe very strongly that these rezonings need to be made with public transit in mind. And I know where you live in sort of areas in sort of the lower part of Manhattan aren't like where I live on the Upper West Side, where we are accessible by 3 transit lines. And we need to make sure that any rezoning that happens is prioritized towards areas that can provide robust access to upzoning and with a plan for a subway and bus service expansion. I am very, very focused on public transit being the great equalizer of what's going to bring our city back in the COVID era. And any type of development that we do needs to take that in mind and prioritize it. And I guess a final thing I'll say, and I've said this when it comes to the homeless situation or whether it comes to the zonings and the rezonings that we're all talking about now throughout Manhattan, is that every community and every neighborhood needs to play its part. My greatest strength as a community board chair and as a leader, a civic leader, has been to bring together people, even sometimes who don't agree with me, to facilitate those conversations and ensure really what is the representation of all interested groups and residents of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Bill Ferns? All right, Bill, unmute yourself.
It wasn't letting me unmute, sorry. Okay, thanks. So my question is, New York City voters have repeatedly voted for term limits. The city council and all the elected officials are term limited. Turns out community board members are term limited. Community board district managers are not term limited. And they are appointed by the community boards. While there's some efficiencies in that, there's also, as we know from incumbency, an accumulation of power. How do you feel about term limits for community board district managers, and how could you use the appointments of community board members to end that practice, if not by law, at least in practice? Thank you.
Sure, it's a really great question, and we've been dealing with it in our neighborhood here on the Upper West Side, where we have a very active community board. I've served for 10 years on Community Board 7. I've served for 3.5 of them as a chair, and several other years as committee chair. What I believe very strongly in, and I've said this, I think you'll see it in my questionnaire that I sent to your group, is that there needs to be transparency with district managers across the board. And I think you have wide disparities across the 12 boards. One of the things that I think this board and this position, the borough president, really needs to be is an executive, not a legislator, somebody who can actually provide management and leadership to reform that process. So what I would like to do, there are a few specific things that I've spelled out in the questionnaire, but I'm happy to provide them now. One is I want to provide transparency with the district managers. They need to be met with more regularly. I think Gail has been an incredible borough president, and she represented me as a city council member for a long time. I bring a management perspective and do think that there needs to be more standardization across the 12 boards. They are servants, ambassadors for our neighborhoods. They're also getting paid. The 50 members of the board on each of the 12 boards are not getting paid. One of the things I've tried to do is host borough, sort of what I've advocated for is to host things like borough board meetings in a different district each month, so it draws attention to each neighborhood throughout the year. I know that doesn't directly answer your question, but it answers the question of diversity, which I think is incredibly needed on our community boards right now. And for anyone who's not on this call, I think most of you know that one of the key job responsibilities of the borough president is to know how to manage and run those 12 boards. I will do that in a way that nobody else can do it, and I'm going to work harder than anyone else because I've actually done it. And for me, I want to bring more people into the applicant process. I want to make things more diverse. I want to host meetings throughout neighborhoods, not just at 1 Center Street, not just at 125th Street, which are the 2 Manhattan Borough offices. I want to go across the borough to make sure that every part of the neighborhood is being represented.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, Rachel Levine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear. Oh, I think you just muted yourself.
Oh, hey, Rachel.
Rachel, sorry, you're still on mute. If you could go hit the button in the lower left corner. Yep, there you go.
Okay, great. Sorry, apologize. I'm a Luddite. My question has to do with, because the borough presidency also is so, impacts real estate so much. How do you feel about the legislation that Brad Hoyleman has proposed, having a pied-à-terre tax?
Sure. I think he's called it the millionaire's tax, or the beyond just the pied-à-terre tax. But look, I may take a slightly different view than some of my other candidates. I believe very strongly, again, that every neighbor and every person has to play its part, and we need to make sure that our neighbors who live here and are spending a lot of money and making a lot of money do their part to stay here. We also want people to stay here and have a tax base. And I think one of the most critical pieces of this job is going to be having the right type of leader who is going to be able to work with everyone, again, including people. I absolutely want people who are making millions and millions of dollars to pay their fair share for these taxes. They need to do that. But I also want to make sure that in exchange for that, they're staying in the city, that their kids are going to great public schools. My mom was a public school teacher on the Upper West Side for a very long time. We want to make sure that we have great arts and culture. We want there to be a reason for people to stay here. And we need to be able to work with everyone. That means working with people who may disagree with us. And I am unbossed and unbought by real estate. Several others, may say that, but I'm actually really one of those people who, I'm willing to talk to everyone. And I think to bring this city back, we need to have those really hard conversations and really focus on how we can bring and bridge the divides that are needed. What I know from my own sort of economic experience, having lived here for 25 years, it's going to be a really prolonged economic crisis. And the answer, we need to be taxing the rich. Of course we do. But doing it in a way that we need to also be talking to them and figuring out how they can help bring back culture, bring back arts, bring back jobs, forcing them, in addition to paying their fair share, also really holding them accountable to really bringing back the things that make people want to live specifically in Manhattan. And I think there's nobody better qualified than I am to be able to work with all those communities to make it happen.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. We're just now at time, and we're going to shift now to Brad Hoyleman. Brad, are you on?
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. And my website is elizabethcaputo.com, and I'd be grateful for your support, and just want to thank everyone at Downtown Democrats for the chance to speak today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi, Brad.
Nice to see you, Jamie. Nice to see everyone. What a great turnout.
Yeah. So you've got 15 okay. minutes, break it up however you like, between statement and questions, and we'll take the folks who have their hand raised first. Again, if you have your hand raised for Elizabeth, please lower it so the folks who have questions for Brad can go. So Brad, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Really, it's great to be here on this Zoom. I saw a cartoon the other day. These two middle-aged folks like me are on a couch. One of them has a laptop and the other looks at her and says, I have an impending feeling of Zoom. So that's our new reality. But let me just acknowledge what happened. at the nation's capital this past week. I'm just, like most of you, I'm sure, all of us are just so angry and despondent about that group of terrorists who attacked our democracy. And I just want you to know that I've signed a letter and called for both the resignation of the president, the enactment of the 25th Amendment, impeachment and conviction, anything. We most certainly cannot let this stand and let the clock run out on this presidency. So you have my full support in resolutions that you pass, as well as calling on those New York members of Congress who fomented this riot against our electoral system should be held accountable too. And I'm going to be continuing to work on that, including looking at members of the New York State Legislature who may have been complicit in some of their words leading up to the riot. But back to our agenda, just to tell you a little bit about myself. I know a lot of you, if not most of you, and my name is State Senator Brad Hoyleman. I represent the 27th District, which is far-flung. It runs from Canal Street on the west side all the way up to 72nd, and on the east side, 56 all the way down to 3rd. So with some permutations and cutouts in between, thanks to gerrymandering. But I grew up not in New York. I grew up in rural West Virginia in a town so small. To get to my house, I had to tell the FedEx guy, take a left at the barn that says chew mail pouch tobacco, treat yourself to the best. And it was at the end of the dirt road. So it's been a long journey for me to get here, but 27 years ago, I moved here after winning a scholarship out of West Virginia. Met my husband within the first 6 months. We remain in the village where I've lived all of my adult New York life, and have 2 small daughters, a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old. My husband likes to say we are the oldest parents on our first marriage. Growing up in West Virginia, I really did learn something that has resided with me ever since, which is a love of reading and understanding the importance of public education. So I really want to thank my mom for that. It was a tough childhood, but I got out of there, and I have been in New York, as I said. When I first came to the city, I joined my local block association, became active in my local community board, eventually became the chair, and succeeded Tom Duane when he stepped down after his term, 14 years in the Senate. And for the last 8 years, that's where I've been representing this amazing district that has suffered, as so many of our neighborhoods have, business and the human toll from COVID. But I've been proud to have passed what are considered to be some of the most consequential bills in Albany, especially since we have gained the Democratic majority. With Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal, I passed a bill called the Child Victims Act, which allows the adult survivors of child sexual abuse to take their abusers to court and to identify abusers who may still be in contact with kids. I'll never forget when I first introduced that bill, a constituent came up to me, told me this harrowing story about how he had been groomed and then abused by his high school coach. And I was just, so upset by the whole story. I told him I couldn't imagine anything worse. And he said, no, Senator, the worst thing about this story is that individual is still coaching in my high school. So thanks to the Child Victims Act, those predators have been identified and removed from contact with our kids, as well as provided some redress to those individuals, whether they're in the Boy Scouts of America, the Catholic Church, or our school system. I also passed a bill during the watershed moment of police reform this past summer called the Police Stat Act, the Police Statistics and Transparency Act, which for the first time is going to require local police departments across the state to share data on the demographics of the people they're arresting and ticketing. It's hard to believe that our Division of Criminal Justice Services did not have that information. They actually had to Google to find out if someone had died in police custody or not. Now they get that information thanks to that bill, along with 50A reforms that strip the secrecy around police personnel records, which is so important that we identify the bad apples in our police force. I also passed the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. That's the Transgender Human Rights Law, which has gone into effect now and provides protections for transgender and non-binary New Yorkers. Again, one of the moments that really has moved me and rewarded me as a representative is when I looked up in the gallery as I spoke about gender, and I saw a constituent who I knew with her transgender son watching as we passed gender. And that was really an amazing moment I'll never forget. I also am very proud for taking on the anti-vaccine moment, the anti-vaxxers. I strengthened vaccine requirements for kids this past year before COVID ever hit, when we had a measles outbreak where 1,000 New Yorkers were sickened, and most of those were children, and kids who were immunocompromised or who were battling cancer, or pregnant women couldn't get vaccinated and were in danger of having children who did not have the measles vaccine. I've taken a lot of hits for that. I've taken threats from the anti-vax movement. They've threatened my life, my husband's life, my children's life. But you know what? It's all been worth it, and I would definitely do it again. So if anything, taking on these kinds of powerful interests like the anti-vaxxers or the NRA or the big tobacco, when I, with Linda Rosenthal again, banned flavored e-cigarettes, has energized me to take on this job of borough president, given the challenges ahead. So I'm running for borough president because I want to see a Manhattan with policies to help small businesses pay the rent through this COVID crisis. That's why Harvey Epstein and I have proposed a bill called Save Our Storefronts, which you can read more about at saveourstorefronts.nyc. It is a shared sacrifice model between the commercial tenant and the landlord, and we've piloted it already at Grand Central with the MTA, and it's working out really well. I definitely want to see Manhattan with new major public spaces and new affordable housing, including looking to areas like Midtown, which has over 100 million square feet of empty retail space that we can repurpose, whether it's supportive housing to help our homeless or consumer-facing businesses that we could create as hometown headquarters for companies like Warby Parker that was built here in New York City. We could encourage those types of entrepreneurs in Midtown as well as address the affordable housing crisis. And I want to see a Manhattan with programs to permanently preserve and protect neighborhoods like Chinatown, Koreatown, East Harlem, Lower East Side, and other cultural enclaves. That is what makes New York City so special. And I want to see a Manhattan that is economically equitable, one that allows young people and artists to move here and senior citizens to retire here without bankrupting themselves. And a Manhattan that is racially just. It's worth acknowledging the fact that all the candidates for borough president are white, and how that might be reflective of many of the inequalities in our borough is worth examining. So I have a record of getting things done in Albany. I'm going to put that same energy in fighting for you as Manhattan borough president. We live in the best borough in the greatest city in the world, and we have to keep it that way. And I look forward to you speaking more in the remaining minutes of this conversation. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks, Brad. Okay, first we have Scott. Scott Kaplan, are you on?
Thank you, Jamie and Brad. So I respectfully ask if you could make the case why state legislators, any state legislators who were just reelected to new two-year terms, which began about a week ago, should be out campaigning to be elected to city and borough positions.
Well, I think that's up for the voters to decide, Scott, definitely. I think that's, an example of a legislator with a track record, with 8 years of experience, 79 bills that I've passed, progressive initiatives, not just in the legislature, but in the community, like lowering the speed limit on the West Side Highway, forcing the NYPD to move off of a pier that They've been sitting there for 20 plus years. Getting working with the DOT to get the first busway across Manhattan. So it's a combination, Scott, of the legislative record and the progressive initiatives that I think makes me qualified for this office. I'll leave it up to the voters to decide whether you have to be out of office to run for office. That's one way to approach it, but the other way is to continue to fight for what you believe in every step of the way, whether it's in Albany or at City Hall. I'll be doing both. Thank you.
Thanks. Lois Rakoff, are you on? Lois?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Thank you. This is regarding LGBTQ youth, not so much teens in high school, but those that are like 17, 18, 19, 20. They don't have a place to be. They don't have permanent housing. They don't have dorms. They don't have a place to go. Maybe they'll be on a friend's couch for a few days, but then they have to go. And I have seen one or two of my former students. I'm a teacher for sexuality and sex education in Brooklyn. In the cubbies of the outdoor dining, they have no place to be. So the job opportunities are very poor. And I'm not talking about HEME or the Door or Fournay. I'm talking about what as Manhattan Borough President, what can you encourage to help these older young people?
For sure. Thanks, Lois. That is a great question. I mean, queer kids have it really difficult, particularly if they're rejected by their parents. And I've worked in Albany to make it a little better for them, particularly since the Trump administration has tried to make it more difficult for them, particularly transgender and non-binary youth. We passed my bill, along with Deborah Glick, to ban so-called LGBTQ conversion therapy. Literally, there were therapists on Union Square who were taking kids into their offices and trying to convert them to heterosexuality.
Yes.
We know that's not even possible or a good thing necessarily. And but it's a horrible case of child abuse, and we stopped that in the state of New York. I passed legislation that would require homeless providers to actually be trained on queer youth, on LGBTQ youth. That's so important that they have an understanding of that. We've seen that certain homeless providers do not have the mindset to treat those kids fairly. And many of those kids who go to those shelters are afraid, rightly so, because some of them are dangerous. And then third, let's just look at the issue of homelessness in general, the need for supportive housing and specific LGBTQ housing for kids. I mean, I'm proud in the East Village that, again, a non-legislative initiative that I helped fund with my colleague, Assemblywoman Deborah Glick, the Ali Fournay Center, and Carlina Rivera and her predecessor, Rosie Mendez, to have the first standalone LGBTQ youth homeless center in New York. And I'm proud that it's in my district. So we need to do more in that regard. And then finally, it's so much about education. I have a bill to, require LGBTQ history. And I'm a co-sponsor of legislation for better sex education. And I know you agree with that, Lois, because it's not sufficient in our public schools. We have such great LGBTQ history here in our city. I live a couple of blocks from 2 Fifth Avenue. In that building at 2 Fifth Avenue lived Larry Kramer, Ed Koch, Edie Windsor, and Congresswoman Bella Abzug, all in the same building. Can you imagine getting in the elevator with all of those characters at the same time? That itself would be an LGBTQ history course in and of itself. But we need to teach that great history because we have the center of our human rights movement here in America, the Stonewall Inn. And you know what? We need to make the Stonewall Inn itself a national landmark. We cannot let that become a nail salon or a Starbucks. The federal government needs to work with New York, and I pledge to do that as borough president. I think I'm uniquely positioned to bring that effort to fruition.
Thank you,
All right,
Brad.
thanks, Brad. And thanks, Lois. So that actually puts us a little bit over time. So we're going to move now to Ben Kalos. Ben, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna put my email in the chat.
Great.
Okay.
And obviously folks that are with the campaign should look out for questions for their candidates. So Ben, if you want to unmute yourself, you've got 15 minutes. Break it up however you want between statement and questions.
For me, it's about hearing from you and your questions, so I'm going to just jump in. I want to thank all of our sponsors for hosting today's forum and for all of you for joining us on a Sunday afternoon at 164 participants. I stand incredibly impressed. I think this is the highest attended forum we've done so far. Before I go on, I want to just say that this week we watched a violent insurrection against our nation's capital instigated by our president, Donald Trump. This was an attack on our democracy, clear and simple. President Trump should have been removed the last time we impeached him, and he must be impeached again and finally removed from office, full stop. I'm Councilmember Ben Kalos. I'm co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, and I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because anywhere else in America, people struggle to get out. But here in New York City, we struggle to stay. And together, I believe that we can fix that. I grew up right here in Manhattan, graduated from the Bronx High School of Science and our state university system. Living with a single mom, sharing a room with her, living with my grandparents, I was on free and reduced school lunch. And I was so ashamed for other kids to know how poor I was that I just didn't eat. That's why when I got elected, I fought to make school lunch free. And I want to feed every single child dinner as part of universal after school. As a tenant in market rate 1 bedroom with my wife and daughter, and you'd hear her, everyone else has, but it's her nap time. And we actually had our landlord spike our rent and force us out while we had a difficult high-risk pregnancy. And I can tell you that even with thousands of vacant apartments, Manhattan still has an affordable housing crisis. Developers get billions, corrupt politicians get thousands in campaign contributions, and tenants like us, we pay for it all. That's why when I ran for city council, I refused big money from real estate developers, corporations, and lobbyists. Then I wrote the law so more progressive candidates could run the right way and win. When thousands of people took to the street to demand the city council hold the NYPD accountable, I listened, and I'm the only one in this race who voted to defund the police. Together, we can elect a city council and borough president who haven't been corrupted by real estate and corporate money. We can prioritize a worker-led recovery, hoping you'll join our team for a city where we no longer have to struggle to stay. We can win a city for all of us. I'd love to hear from you. The questionnaire was incredibly detailed. We submitted something that should be around 8 to 10 pages. I hope you'll take a moment to read it. Otherwise, I see a lot of important folks that I've worked with over the years who are going to, I'm sure, have great questions. So I'm looking forward to that.
All right, thank you, Ben. Dr. Gil Horowitz, are you on? Okay, if Dr. Horowitz is not on yet, we'll go to Michael Marino. Michael, you want to unmute yourself?
Thanks, Jamie. Hey, Ben. I wanted to ask a question similar to what Bill had asked the first candidate who spoke about accountability and oversight of community boards. My community board specifically, we have a very toxic district manager who basically anytime anyone opposes her says, the borough president does nothing but sign my checks. They don't control what I do or how I act. So how can that be changed and how can that be fixed, especially when the district manager is paired with an absentee chair who basically just lets the district manager do what they want because they're doing the chair's job for them as well?
I got my start on Community Board 8 Manhattan when Scott Stringer appointed me. And I think I've actually proven that when elected officials support their community boards, we can be unstoppable. I've actually funded urban planners for all of my boards, and this year I actually supported urban planners for every single community board. And so just what you're saying is so foreign to me, because I will tell you on Community Board 8, while I was a member, we hired a new district manager. Since I've been a council member, we've hired a new district manager. As a borough president, sorry, as a council member, I supported term limits for the community boards. It was very controversial. I had to fight REBNY on this. They were on the other side of it, and they're going to go into effect in 2029. A lot of the community boards have term limits for chairs, and as borough president, I'd want to try to standardize the rules across the board, but that there should be turnover. Turnover is a good thing. One of the things that I did with Gail Brewer is we actually worked together to introduce and pass a resolution to put teens on community boards. And just to be clear, the board where I have the most appointments has seen the highest turnover in Manhattan because I started taking people off who stopped participating or showing up. I appointed new members from high schools, union members, retirees, where people of color have better representation. The board has a new face, and now it's fighting for affordable housing, good union jobs, safe streets for cyclists and pedestrians. There's also, just as part of the charter, not only did we do the term limits, which was overwhelmingly supported by the voters, but we also did urban planners, transparency around who actually gets appointed. And so I'm hoping that together we can have community boards that represent their communities, where the board members are empowered, and happy to work with you on that.
All right, thank you. Ethan Resnick, if you're on, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd lowered my hand. I had a question for Senator Hoyleman.
Okay, no problem. Michael Kramer, you on?
Yes. Historic districts are under attack by the YIMBYs right now. The borough president just sided with the developer down at the seaport that they could buy a certificate of appropriateness from landmarks if they contributed to it for a community benefit. Will you be such a borough president?
When we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the landmark law, I led a citywide effort with Gail Brewer and Rosie Mendez to protect a very evil bill called Introduction 755, which would have said any building that didn't get landmarks approval within a certain number of days would actually be prohibited from coming back to the landmarks community to the LPC for 5 years. Since then, we've been able to bring a lot of landmarks. There are actually candidates for mayor and borough president who are talking about removing landmarks. If you speak to any one of the landmarks community, there's no stronger preservationist than me. And no, as borough president, you would see absolutely no tolerance for people trying to destroy our historic districts, and no tolerance for a landmarks preservation commission that is in the business of trying to raise our communities and remove any historic elements to it. Along those same lines, I'm a little bit tired of the current LPC that is telling me that cultural landmarks, places that were the birth of jazz, that if they don't have the right architectural elements, that gets to be bulldozed. So much of our cultural history, particularly in lower Manhattan to northern Manhattan, is cultural in nature and needs to be protected and preserved.
Thank you. I would hate to see the landmarks to be for sale.
I've never taken money from the real estate community. I never will. I've always refused it. And please touch base with any historics group. I will stand up to the developers for our landmarks any day. I'm a preservationist.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Janine Kiley.
Hi, good afternoon, Councilmember Kalis. I sort of a follow-up question to that. What land use policies do you support for increasing the supply of truly affordable housing? You talked about preservationists. I want to be more specific. Do you support or oppose upzoning historic districts? Do you support, or where do you stand on selling NYCHA air rights? And if so, how would the proceeds be spent? And how would you work with the city in this tight budget environment to purchase privately owned vacant offices and hotels and converting them immediately to affordable housing versus waiting for this sort of trickle down development for housing? Thank you.
That was, I think, 7 questions.
Just three. Upzoning historic districts, NYCHA air rights, purchasing private property and converting to housing.
Sure. We should not be going into a historic district and upzoning. That the purpose of a historic district is to create a place that we're preserving for time. If you've ever been to New Orleans, they have beautiful historic districts. New York City needs to have them too. There are literally people in this race who would upzone the village of Harlem and make it denser than the Upper East Side and displace that entire community. It's actually one of the reasons that I sponsored legislation with public advocate Jumaane Williams that would require the environmental impact statement to study the displacement of people of color, Black and brown people from communities that are otherwise affordable before we come in and upzone them and push them out. This needs to be a city for all of us. In terms of the NYCHA infill, I'm pretty strong on the record. I think I'm the only one in this race who is on the record in this way with Gail Brewer. When the mayor came in and wanted to put up a luxury building on NYCHA land, we said we don't have enough land. It needs to be 100% affordable. It needs to have a preference for the existing residents, and we're not going to support this unless you're willing to actually come to the table with the residents and negotiate. We sued, we won. It has to go through ULURP if they're going to do anything there, and it's going to make sure that at least me and with my vote as council member, will put the residents first. NYCHA leaders should be the ones, and tenants should be the ones deciding what happens at their NYCHA developments. In terms of the air rights, I actually do like the idea, and I did suggest to the city that they should sell and transfer the air rights. The one thing is I want to be cautious to make sure that we're not just moving the air rights southernly across the street so that low income, majority people of color end up living in the shadows of the wealthy. That's not a solution either. So we have to be cautious about not letting people build up too many air rights in any given place so that you end up with a super tall in a neighborhood that's otherwise a very low size. And the, what was the last one? She's muted. In terms of it, what I would just say is our current zoning process is broken. It's driven almost completely by for-profit planning and developers who have given council members lots of money and even borough president candidates lots of money. And it should be driven by the community. And so in my district, with a mayor who refused to do any affordable housing in my district for fear of upsetting revenue, we've actually been building affordable housing in my district on Roosevelt Island with all people Governor Cuomo. So we've actually done 1,000 units of affordable housing, 300 new, 100% affordable building, and 600 preserved. We've been building supportive housing all over the city, all over the district. No help from the mayor there. We actually even built supportive housing for homeless women and children across the street from where I live, going to school with where my daughter will go. And ultimately, as borough president, I'm going to continue what I do currently, which is going to every single developer, begging and pleading and doing everything I can at my power to force them and get them to do affordable housing. And I would really love if our Albany elected officials would be kind enough to remove the Erstat law so that New York City could govern its own housing market instead of being governed by legislators from Buffalo. Janine, did I hit it?
Thank you, Ben. You're right on. Yep, we gave you a couple extra minutes on the back end because we were a little late, so we're just at time right now. So thank you, Ben. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to hand it to my co-president of CODA, Tati. She's going to take it from here for the remaining candidates. So Tati.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. And thanks everybody for joining. I'm Tati, co-president of CODA. And the next candidate we have is Councilmember Mark Levine. And we're going to start, we have 15 minutes and we have, you can break that up as you would like for intro and questions. So I'll hand it over to
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tati. And hello, everybody. I'm really honored to have the chance to spend some time with you today. Of course, I'm Mark Levine, City Council member from Northern Manhattan, chair of the City Council Health Committee. What a week this has been, just brutal. In the wake of the insurrection in the Capitol. And I know you share my sentiment that we need accountability, that extends not just to the insurrectionists, but everyone who has aided and abetted the Trump cult, and of course, Trump himself. And he needs to be removed from office. Just he doesn't have a Twitter account anymore, but I'm certainly quite concerned that he still has access to the nuclear codes. And I believe he needs to be impeached so that he can never run for office again. But we have challenges here closer to home. We have a lot to fight for at a time of crisis in the city. And really, I've spent my entire adult life fighting on behalf of the city since the day I graduated college with a physics degree and became a bilingual math and science teacher and proud union member at Junior High School 149 in the South Bronx. I went on to start a community development credit union, kind of like a cooperatively owned bank in Uptown Manhattan that has now made $25 million in small loans, microloans, helping low-income families uptown do everything from buy their first home computer to start their own business. And I'm really proud now to have been elected twice in one of the most diverse districts in New York City. I represent West Harlem, part of the Upper West Side, and part of Washington Heights, where I live with my family, our two sons, who are public school students, one high school and one CUNY. In my first term, I chaired the Parks Committee, where I fought and won millions of dollars for parks that had been neglected in low and moderate income neighborhoods to support gardeners and maintenance workers and the other investments that they need to be healthy green spaces for their community. In 2007, I made history by defeating the landlord lobby to pass legislation making New York City the first place in America to establish a right to counsel for tenants in housing court facing eviction. This has been a game change. This policy has now been replicated in 7 cities nationally. It's gaining momentum in Congress. It's part of AOC's housing platform. And most importantly, here in the city, before the pandemic, the last time we had good data on evictions, we saw a 40% drop in the eviction rate in New York City and fewer families entering homelessness because of it. I think, as I mentioned before, I think many of you know that this term I'm chairing the Health Committee in the New York City Council. And in that capacity, I have fought nonstop against this pandemic on behalf of science, on behalf of equity. And I've done it no matter who I've had to take on at every level of government. And I'm running now to be your next borough president to take that fight to the next level, because this is our moment to go big. We must go big, to do even more to protect vulnerable tenants, to take unprecedented steps to save our small businesses, to do big things, bold things like creating a public bank in New York City that can invest in social, economic, and racial justice, to reimagine street space in a way that prioritizes people over cars, to double down on investment in parks and open space, and to push forward sane climate policy so that New York City does its part to curb the emission of greenhouse gases. Ustedes saben que no importa el idioma que usted hable ni dónde haya nacido, que seguiré luchando por usted, al igual que he hecho durante toda mi carrera. Ese es mi compromiso. I am so excited now to chat with you about the future of our borough, about downtown Manhattan, and about how we can build back to be a fairer, smarter, and healthier Manhattan and New York City. That's why I'm running to be borough president, to wage that fight on behalf of you. And I'm excited to have this opportunity to chat today.
Great, thank you, council members. Our first question is from Lynn Ellsworth. You can unmute yourself. I just asked you to unmute. You on? Great.
Sorry, my question had been for Kalos. It was already answered by somebody else.
All right. So the next question is from Kathy Nazari.
Hi, Mark. It's always great to see you.
Likewise, Kathy. Great to see you.
Thank you for everything that you've done and continue to do. You mentioned curbing emissions. Excuse me, one of my cats is here. As borough president, what steps would you take to make New York carbon neutral?
Oh, well, there's so much. I mean, let's not forget that transportation policy is in part environmental policy and climate change policy. And so our efforts to transition to mass transit, to making this a city in which it's easier to walk and bike and move around without a private car, also is critical to our fight to reduce emissions. Secondly, let's focus on the single largest source of climate change, of greenhouse gas emissions in New York City, which are our large buildings. And I am really proud to have been a co-sponsor on landmark legislation that we passed in the New York City Council that put New York City in the forefront globally in not just incentivizing or recommending, but forcing large buildings to dramatically reduce their reliance on power that is generated through the use of greenhouse gases. And this is a big legislation that's going to require years of difficult implementation, and that's going to fall in part on the next borough president. But this is our chance to model for the world how we can curb emissions in large buildings, which really are the largest single source of spread. But this has to be at the forefront for the next borough president and everyone in leadership in the years going forward.
Great. The next question is from Kim Sillen.
Hello, thank you. I'd like to go back to the East River Park issue that somebody asked about much earlier, and the resiliency plan. It has come to light just in the last couple of days that there is no value engineering report that the city had been talking about as the reason for scrapping the first community-based plan for the resiliency plan. And I was wondering what, as borough president, you would do, whether the current plan has gone forward by the time you would be borough president, or whether it's been stalled. How would you handle that?
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Was muted. Thank you for asking about this critical plan. I mean, it's just reprehensible how the de Blasio administration has handled this project after years of community-led planning to just simply switch the game at the last hour. Really was just profoundly unfair. And I certainly have a lot of concerns about whether there'll be full funding for this project. I mean, the ultimate nightmare would be to leave this project half done and get no environmental benefit and all the horrible disruptions. And I'm certainly concerned about the impact on the surrounding community under any circumstance because of the construction. We do have to take action to protect communities that are in the floodplain. And so I think that my role is going to make sure that we have full oversight of this project, that we have much better community engagement that we've had, that we minimize negative impact on the surrounding neighborhoods, and that we find a way to protect those who are in the danger zone because of the mounting threat of flooding due to climate change.
Next question is from Paul Newell.
Hi, council member. Thank you so much for joining us. So my question is relates to something I heard you discussing on Lehrer the other day, and that is, pertaining to your chairship of the health committee and how we can do a better job of vaccine distribution and preparation for the next phases of this pandemic. And obviously, hopefully some of that will be over by the time you are in the borough president's office, but what that office can do with regard to health.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. And at the pace at which we are currently vaccinating, this won't be done by the time we inaugurate the next borough president. We, to put it plainly, are far, far behind where we need to be. Even after some increase this week, we vaccinated less than 80,000 people. We need to be vaccinating 400,000 people a week if we're going to get to herd immunity by the middle of this year so that we can have something like a summer to look forward to. We must go big on vaccination. We should have sites in every zip code of New York City that are open 24 hours, 24/7. No more of this only vaccinating during business hours and very little on weekends, evenings, and holidays, as has been done so far. And actually, I'm working on a bill in the city council to require this, to require that at least one site in every zip code is open 24/7. We also need much more flexibility on who's vaccinated. And this now is coming after a lot of pressure from myself and many others. Starting tomorrow, new groups are going to be eligible, including people who work in transit, education, first responders, and critically, people who are 75 years and over. But we still have a capacity shortage. I still have equity concerns as well. It's great that we are going to be allowing for vaccination in some of the employee groups that I mentioned. But what about someone who's delivering food to our doors, or works in a supermarket, or a laundromat, or an Amazon warehouse for that matter? These are essential workers, they're low wage, and they have been out there taking risks for us and getting sick for us throughout this pandemic. It's been one of the biggest drivers of racial inequality in COVID. So let's make sure that now in this vaccine process, we prioritize not just efficiency and scale, but also equity. And lastly, Paul, on this point, for people who say, oh, this is too ambitious, how could we do it? When we had a smallpox outbreak in 1947, we vaccinated 6 million people in 23 days. We can do this, New York City can do this, but we need to go big, much bigger than we have until now.
Thank you. The next question is from Marian Rydell.
Thank you. Mark, I'd like to go back to the question regarding the East Side River Resiliency Plan. I don't think anyone argues that we need resiliency. We really are in the floodplain. There are two things that were brought up that I don't feel like you addressed directly. So one is there was a plan that involved the community that was agreed upon, and that plan was pulled supposedly based on a value engineering report, which we just found out 2 days ago, from somebody requesting a FOIL that it doesn't exist. So given that, just to say moving forward, we're going to have community involvement doesn't change the fact that the plan's much more expensive. We have no idea why if it's value engineered. It does not have community involvement, etc. So I didn't hear you directly respond to those.
Well, no, thank you, Marion. And as I said, it's outrageous that the community's plan, the result of a lot of hard work and smart thinking, was completely thrown out. And if they're using the existence of that plan as pretext, well, even more shame on them. What do we do at this point? We have an urgent need to move forward on some form of protection. And so I think what we need to do now is hold the administration's feet to the fire about continued community involvement and minimizing of disruption from the construction project, ensuring that funding is adequate. These are the points that I mentioned. And I don't take any of this for granted. It's going to require continued advocacy and vigilance to make sure that, yes, there is protection in place, because we all agree we need that, but that we do a much better job than we had at involving the community and respecting their opinion.
Is there anything, I'm sorry, I'll let it go after this, but is there anything we can do at this point to say, foul, this was a foul, there is no value engineering report, you've made decisions based on a false statement? This is brand new information. We've kind of knew it, but now we know it for sure.
I mean, to the extent that there was false statements made, absolutely, we have to hold them accountable for that. That's outrageous. It only adds to the long chain of mistakes they've made in managing this project, and we need to call them out for it.
Will you do that?
I'm doing it right now, and I'll continue to.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for about one more question from Chris Castillo, is the next person whose hand I see raised. Want to unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, yes. I have a question. I have a New York City disability plaque, and I have to drive to wherever I go, so I can't use public transportation. And I know there's a lot of other people that I know have those plaques. So are you going to restrict those people also from driving in the city?
Well, thank you, Chris, for bringing up this critical angle. And really the city's failure to adequately serve New Yorkers with disabilities on so many levels, which we don't have the time to talk about, but in terms of access to employment, freedom from discrimination, and so much more. But really the biggest failing is in transportation. It's simply unacceptable that still today only about a quarter of our subway stations have adequate accessibility. We need to prioritize that going forward as we return to investment. And I totally agree with you. There are some people for whom mass transit is not an option and may never be an option. And that's why we have a provision that allows for special permits for people with disabilities, which I absolutely support. And I think that every change we make to transportation policy needs to bear that in mind. I mean, there are people who don't have any other choice but to travel by car, and I respect that. And I don't think you heard me say anything that would infringe upon your ability to get around the city. We need to make sure that everyone can, through improving accessibility in mass transit, through fixing the broken accessoride system, which I think we all agree has been woefully managed and can be much better. And so I thank you for bringing that up, and you have my commitment to work hard for the disability community in New York City.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Council Member. I think that's all the time that we have, but thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Tati. Thank you, everyone, for this conversation, and stay safe out there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So now we will go over to the next candidate, Lindsay Boylan, and we'll have 15 minutes, and you can break that up as you like for candidate remarks and questions. So I will hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for this time. This is, I think, a collection of folks that I've gotten to speak with individually, and it's really wonderful to get a chance to have such a big, broad group of interest represented. And I'd love to take a step back and say how I found myself here. Several of you may know me because I recently ran for Congress on the west side of Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn. And you may wonder, hey, is this her thing? Does she want to run for office? Is she one of those people? And I can tell you, I'd like to tell you the story of how I got to this moment to kind of explain a little bit more about what it's really all about for me. After I lost the election this summer, I found myself walking the city streets from Tribeca all the way up to Central Harlem. And not only was I reminded of my love for the city that really informed my whole career, but also, you know, you see the tremendous need, you see the tremendous challenges that are facing our borough and our city. And, you know, everything from closed retail shops, you know, really desolate streets, you know, lack of activity, programming, people moving different places, having fear of being out and about, issues with sanitation, all of it. And I knew I had to help. My husband wanted me to take a break, maybe do something relaxing, but I'm not very good at that. What I know how to do is step in and help. And it's really what I've been doing my whole career. I've spent my whole career in urban planning. I moved to New York with $100 in my pocket, and I bugged a famous urban planner, Alex Garvin, until he gave me my first job in New York, thinking about how to make public parks work for people. Ultimately, I spent the next decade primarily managing public parks, most notably Bryant Park, but the pedestrianized plazas of Broadway, making them work for people, making them safe, making them positive, making them interesting to return to. And during that time, I got my business school degree at Columbia while working full time. Afterwards, I went into municipal finance because I wanted to understand how you fund infrastructure, this infrastructure that I was so passionate about making work in the city. I realized I didn't want to be an investment banker after a few years, and I went and worked in state government. Ultimately, I was the chief of staff for the state's economic development agency, and then ultimately the secretary for economic development and housing. So I was the jobs and housing secretary for the state. And that was a tremendous opportunity in so many ways. During that time, I got to help pass the $15 minimum wage with the business community's buy-in. I oversaw the state's recovery work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, oversaw the Office of Storm Recovery, which continues to this day to disperse funds post-Hurricane Sandy. And I got a real introduction to housing. I mean, we all know it in our own ways as New Yorkers. I moved 9 times in 10 years in my first decade in New York. But it was a real passion to learn about once it came in my portfolio as the Secretary for Economic Development. And when I think about the challenges in front of us in this city and frankly this country, there could be no more important job to me than the borough president. This person is supposed to be your advocate to make sure all the investments, all the tools we use in the landscape to make this city more livable, more equitable, more sustainable. I'm hearing a lot of that about issues downtown. This is the person who you're empowering to enact all the things that are incredibly important to you. That doesn't just mean in terms of capital investments and community board appointments and responses to zoning and land use. It also means in how I will bring together different agencies that dysfunctionally create problems in communities when they look beyond communities instead of at communities at what their needs are. And that's what I'm hearing a lot of. It's been a real opportunity for me already in this race to get to know some of the folks in this meeting. That's really how I want to do this job, is make sure I show up everywhere I need to be, listen before I speak, and then speak cogently and act to the extent of all my ability and all my bully pulpit and all my power to ensure that what we build, what we create, and what we invest in is better for New Yorkers and better for people in Manhattan. And I think this has to ultimately be the example, not just for the city, but for the country. Because if Manhattan can't do it, how can we expect the country to recover and use this real crisis to get somewhere better? And I feel like my whole career has been building up to this point, adding to my portfolio of knowledge on how to help. And it would just be the most incredible opportunity of a lifetime to get that chance. And I'm really excited to be here today with all of you. On the personal side, I'm raising a 6-year-old daughter with my husband, and she's the light of my life. And everything I think about creating for our city, I think about creating for her too. I have served on 2 community boards as a newly minted post-college student at 22. I was on CB7, Landmarks and Preservation, so some of the issues I'm hearing about. And then when I managed Bryant Park, I was on CB5 as a public member. So really the central business district and issues around that you might have questions about with, the future we're contemplating with respect to how to revitalize Midtown in this post, pandemic world. So having overseen the landscape, the only person on this slate of really impressive people who's done that kind of work, who's overseen all housing for the state of New York and all economic development and job creation, I'm going to put all of that to bear, but first listen and make sure I'm reflecting the values and the priorities that you as our community have for me. So I'm really excited to be here and have a conversation today.
Great, thank you so much, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Our first question is from Tommy Loeb.
Sure.
Hello, Lindsay.
Hi, Tommy.
One of the things, as you know, that has come up through this whole conversation has been East River Park and the plan. And I know that you have taken an interest, and that we recently, just over the last 3 days, found out that the value engineering report, which the city predicated this whole plan on and sold it to the city council and all our local elected officials, does not exist. It would, the independent consultant hired by the borough president wanted it, and they told him he couldn't have it either. And I'm just wondering, having now seen what we have all seen, what you think of what we can do going forward.
Sure. Well, first I'd say, and thank you so much for that question, Tommy. And the first thing I wanted to do, instead of just reading and listening and trying to play catch up with all the work you and other advocates have been doing, was walk the space, as you know we did. And I think you can't speak cogently on any issue unless you actually see how it's playing into people's lives, how different neighborhoods interact and all of that. And I gotta say, there's a tremendous amount of really important community aspects of East River Park that we cannot afford to lose. I think that the city's utterly failed. I think the worst thing about what has happened is the mayor and his team have used this element of fear and not knowing, people having a fear about flooding and resiliency to say this is the only way forward. When in reality, my sense based on the delays with the timeline within the RFP even say that they actually don't even have any sense of certainty around this plan. The more I dug, as I've mentioned to you, the less certainty I had about any reason why they moved away from the community plan. And it was all around this one value engineering report. And that the fact that that either doesn't exist or is not available to the public means that this is a major opportunity, in my view, to really push back. And not just because the mayor and his staff have failed to communicate truthfully and explain any real issues that there may have been with the community plan, but also because we are in the middle of this pandemic. There's already a timeline that's being shifted. My understanding of even the lingering timeline for questions of respondents means that they don't know where this is going. So I think as advocates, and even as an advocate partner, we should be fighting against the mayor at this moment in time. I think press is incredibly important because that's unfortunately what this mayor and most politicians respond to. There is a holding period right now, and I understand the concerns people have about safety, and that's the first thing, right? But there were intermediate steps in terms of preservation, like I think it was a $2 or $3 million buffer, or things that could have been done in the interim to protect the waterfront while the broader project was going on. And I know that was turned away from because said we're going full steam ahead with the mayor's plan. But I think this is a real moment to push back. If there is any moment in this entire timeline to get a better, more understanding of why the plan changed, does it really have anything to do with value engineering, or is it about the FDR? Is it about Con Edison? Is it about, some other broader issue? This is the time to push back. And I do think a majority of that has to be in the press. I mean, I think there's also still legal avenues to pursue, but the worst thing, unfortunately, or fortunately for someone like the mayor and some of our leaders, is to have really bad press, particularly that explains that people fighting to go back to either a community plan or a new version of the community plan are just as concerned with safety as anyone else. Because I think the most really unfortunate and unfair thing is that the mayor and his team are using the real fear people have to say this is the only way forward and to shutter any complaints about that process. And I think that is really disingenuous as a leader. I think right now we should be very publicly pressing forward with the facts or the lack thereof. And nothing that I've seen or read gives me any sense of why the plan was altered. And if it is truly for some engineering purpose, some logistics issue, that should be explained. It should be easier to understand. So I think this is a real critical moment to fight back. I will be showing up with you at any press event. I think continuing to pursue legal avenues is also worthwhile. Let's not forget what's at stake here. We never get our waterfront back. And on the east side, especially of Manhattan, there's far fewer pieces of really tremendous park front on the waterfront. And we need to make sure that we're being the best advocates and stewards as we can for the next generation to have that, in the same way that folks I know grew up going to the barbecues there. So I don't think there's a fight. I don't think there's any fight that's too much at this point, because this is the moment to really seize in this challenging time. There's been some slowing momentum from the plan perspective. And now we've learned that a lot of this stuff actually wasn't ever maybe in existence. So I think this is a real time to fight back personally, and I'll be there with you.
Thank you.
Great. I think we have time for one or two more questions.
I'll try to hurry. I know I want to do more questions.
The next question is from Ben Yee.
Sure, Ben. Hi, Ben.
Howdy. Thanks for coming to the forum. You had mentioned that you did work with the Parks Department and you did economic development, but as I'm sure you're aware, the Borough President's Office is very different from being in the executive. It doesn't have any real direct control over, well, many things. I was going to say anything, but certainly many things. So I'm curious to hear, I've known a lot of the other candidates for a long time. What sort of experiences do you think you're bringing to this role, and what sort of tactics are you bringing to the Borough President's Office and this race that you think are going to help you accomplish what you view as the biggest problems in New York? And what are those problems, and how can you use the Borough President's Office to legitimately address them?
Sure. So we don't even need to go past East River Park in this example. Aside from everything I just mentioned, the most glaringly obvious problem that exists is the lack of coordination between agencies. So NYCHA management, NYCHA underfunding, NYCHA decision-making is a problem for any number of reasons. I've dealt intimately with NYCHA for a number of years. That their plan for resiliency of the buildings of Baruch houses has developed completely in isolation from conversations around the timeline for East River Park, around conversations that DDC would be having, around all these different stakeholders. And yes, you say I did oversee different agencies, but I actually think I've been most effective in my career when I learned enough about how other agencies or organizations worked, found people who care about what they're doing, and brought them together. Because I actually think that a lot of issues that we experience in the public realm could at the very least be mitigated by better communication and interaction amongst people. You know, some people say, oh, Lindsay, what did you think about city council? Do you think about this? As someone who's spent my whole career in urban planning, this element of having to bring people together over limited resources, make decisions that benefit the broader community, and work with different agencies within that is what I've spent my whole career doing and what I want to do here. And, you know, the reason why I rose up pretty high in every job I've ever had, whether we're talking about parks, we're talking about municipal finance, we're talking about economic development, or then the state, is because I developed trustful working relationships with people laterally who had the same goals. And I think a lot of our public servants, and I think a lot of our community servants have the same goals of wanting to live in a livable city. And if you make their job easier to do that, they'll make your job easier to try and accomplish things. And so I actually think everything from my experience with the community board and then overseeing all these agencies who tend to not deal well with one another in some cases, or, you know, rising up through, you know, the economic development arm, not even being from New York or knowing anyone here originally, that takes a lot of chutzpah. And I think good communication, good listening is an incredibly important piece. And I think look at where we are, even with what happened earlier this week. We have so many challenges to confront in this country. A tremendous of deep-seated systemic racism that isn't just in criminal justice issues, isn't just in, you know, education issues. It's in the built environment. I mean, our whole history of housing programs have been largely for the benefit for predominantly middle-class white people. And I think there's a real opportunity to make investments in the public realm in Manhattan, which has, you know, the extremes of everything in terms of, you know, socioeconomic background, to bring people together to a sense of dealing with environmental problems, dealing with the housing crisis, dealing with, you know, small business creation and growth in a way that is frankly necessary. And, you know, I oversaw all small business services for the whole state of New York. I oversaw our minority and women-owned business program, which is more successful than the cities. It's actually nation leading in terms of the number of government contracts that MWBE's had. I oversaw housing and community renewal. So it's, you know, all of the different housing concerns, not just talking about mandatory inclusionary housing, which is one very small piece of the puzzle to dealing with housing. I mean, we've got to do low-income housing tax credits. We've got to do a next generation of Mitchell-Lama. We've got to do vouchers that actually cover the cost of market rate housing. We've got to do much more infill. We've got to preserve NYCHA, not privatize it. And no one else in this race, even, you know, when the good councilman, Kalos from the east side, was talking about the work on, you know, Roosevelt Island and housing preservation, that was work that the agency did under my leadership. And so, you know, I've been doing this important work for a very long period of time. And I think as important as knowing how to bring people together is doing so in a trustworthy way, and also listening. I know you're asking me questions today, but I really do think that being a genuine good listener, understanding the organizational issues that come up that prevent different administrations from working together, and frankly, being willing to call a spade. So I think, you know, if people don't know that much about me, they know that I'm probably willing to speak up when necessary. And I think we're going into an era, especially with an austerity budget, whoever the next mayor is, a limited amount of federal aid, and a governor who's not inclined to assist the city to the extent it will need help. We're going to need some people who bring out the Manhattan elbows when necessary to fight for what we need. And I'm going to do that too.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I think we're just about at time.
I'm
but
sorry,
we-
I'll leave my information. I can talk for a long time, but I'm very excited for this and I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And if you have any further questions, yeah, Lindsay's information will be in the chat.
Sure.
And the next candidate that we have to hear from is Kim Watkins. So we'll have 15 minutes time for introduction and then whatever remaining time for questions. So I will hand it over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Great, great. Hello, everyone. So great to see you. And I've listened to a couple of my fellow candidates, and I know you had the Controllers forum before that. So I'm thinking kind of right now that, like they say about in wine tasting or in fragrance smelling, you kind of forget after, a certain number that your senses kind of get dulled a little bit. So I'm going to try to keep this exciting because I'm sure it can all run together a bit. And the issues are really just so overwhelming right now. My name is Kim Watkins, and I'm president of CEC3. I am the only schools-focused candidate in the BP race. And I'll tell you why I'm really putting a people's focused platform together that centers the school system. And that is because in 2021, your zip code really determines your progress still in terms of educating our next generation. And that is wrong, and it's racist, and I believe it's sexist, but it is really still the case. And in District 3, which is the most segregated school district within the most segregated system in our entire country, I led the 2015 Upper West Side rezoning, which got national attention for its attempt to integrate schools along with deal with overcrowding and some programming issues. We also had the city's first middle school diversity initiative, and I'm the founder of a program that elevates student voice called Model CEC. I believe that if we continue to build housing and focus on development in areas that where we have divested in our public school system, we're going to continue to struggle to bring up and help our next generation prepare not just to get a job, but prepare for a life as a contributing adult, as an informed citizen and participant in the democratic process, which in my opinion is one of the biggest challenges that we have in our country today. So my platform, my campaign is really people focused and centered around the concepts of intersectionality in some of the most significant issues that we have. My top priorities in many ways, as I said, relate to the school system, but then reverberate out into the greater part of the way our borough functions and the way that the borough president office functions. In my opinion, the issue of spending as much energy and time and community sort of discussion on all of the issues that we know to be really contentious. I've heard a bunch of them today. I mean, there's the East River resiliency issue, and of course there are development issues happening in so many different parts of our borough. We spend so much time in these echo chambers, but at the end of the day, whether we end up in multiple levels of court cases and or shaming the elected officials who are making decisions inaccurately, as Lindsay was describing with the mayor, we need solutions that New Yorkers can see and feel, real things that regular New Yorkers will be able to understand in terms of changes. We have, in 10 years, our budget in New York City has almost doubled, 80% of an increase in the specter of all the agencies of New York City. And I don't think we have a lot to show for that. We need to tighten our belt. We need to figure out how to bring democratic institutions back to the level in our communities where it really does make, where your voice is valued, where all voices are valued. And in terms of the school system, helping to bring some checks and balances into the mayoral control structure has been something I've been talking about through the campaign. I'll continue to talk about. In addition to that, I am a member of my board, my HDFC board. I live in HDFC in Harlem. I want to see us talk about more home ownership. You know, Manhattan has a 20% home ownership rate. That is really, really low compared to the rest of the city. It's at around 33%. But what we also know is that only 20% of that 20%, right, 4% are apartments that are owned by Black and Latinx New Yorkers. And that's really unacceptable. We've got to focus on that. We also have to focus on giving priorities to our essential workers. Again, if you think about the school system being so intersectional with respect to everything else that goes on, we can't, our teachers and our nurses, our firefighters can't afford to live in Manhattan. We need to make sure we give priorities to the people that are helping our city operate. And then the last thing that I'll say is that I started out my campaign on the East River. I am a runner. I'm a marathon coach for the Roadrunners Club, and kicked off my campaign in October running the perimeter of Manhattan. And I'm in the process of running all 508 miles of our borough. Like Lindsay, I too believe very strongly that you need to see every single thing going on in order to get a sense of how our city operates. And it is the lack of planning, the lack of long-term planning for climate change, for our school system, for the next pandemic. We need to really get serious about what the next generation is going to be left with if we do not make some changes. So I will take your questions now. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you. And thanks again for being here. The first question I see is from Io Harrington.
So can you hear me, Tati?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to ask the question of you that I would have asked if Mark had time been available. I hear that you live in an HDFC, as do I, on the Lower East Side. A couple of years ago, there was a move to try to monitor HDFCs in order to make sure that they were getting the support that they needed, and also to make sure that they were operating. Most of ours are self-managed, so that they would remain affordable to the community. For other folks, there are 33,000 citywide. If you read in the chat, there are rentals, there are co-ops. West Beth, there's a rental meant to provide affordable housing in perpetuity, and all of the other 33,000 co-ops are meant to provide affordable housing, each unit to its community in perpetuity. In many communities, including yours, due to lack of monitoring by the state or the city, they have sold for between $500,000 to a very few over $1 million, which makes them automatically unaffordable to communities forever.
Yeah.
What is your position about the need to provide some kind of monitoring to ensure that no other units are sold for those outrageous amounts?
You know, it's such a timely question for me, because we literally just had this debate in my building, having reached the expiration of the flip tax and what to do for our own cooperative organization moving forward. And we call ourselves, we have multiple generations of residents, of shareholders in our building. Some of my board members are actually their parents were original members in the building. The thing that I think is most relevant, there are two things. One is that flip taxes are a really interesting filter for cooperative organizations to use to make sure that investors are not coming in, and that families are not moving in to use them as second, sort of pied-à-terre type houses, and or rent them out on like, what's that thing called now that's sort of going away? Airbnb. And that has been happening, was happening in our building. So there's the increased size of a flip tax, I think, is a really interesting way to navigate those treacherous waters. And then the other piece is education. The thing that I find a little bit tricky, I read some of that legislation, like the ombudsman, that there was a bill in the assembly that sort of put this idea forward of having someone that you had to go to check in, and we had to pay a small amount for that. all of those issues are, I mean, they give the government a little too much control, or could lead to the government having a little too much control over organizations that are supposed to be managed independently. So I think that education among the cooperatives is the strongest way that we can help communities stay, keep their buildings strong, but also make sure that they have the money that they need to operate.
Just to follow up on that. So you are not opposed to individual, because most HDFCs operate wonderfully, manage well. But for those, again, who take, sell for those amounts. So are you saying that you have no problem with there not being any monitoring of how these units are sold? Because the bad actors are always going to be the bad actors. So education is not going to change that. Whether we're talking about HDFC or we're talking about restaurants.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There have to be rules. There have to be regulations that are in place. Sort of the way that we understood the ombudsman legislation seemed a little pervasive, a little too much too much involvement at the government level. But I do think that the rules and the regulations should be required, and we have to file statements and participate in various disclosures as part of our business. I think that's absolutely required for any organization that takes advantage of this type of program. And I think we need to expand it, quite frankly. I think that we need far more opportunities through equity earning that develops intergenerational wealth, and quite, also gives people agency in the homes where they make their lives, where they want to thrive. So
thank you.
I hope that helps.
Thanks. The next question we have is from Kathy Nazari.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, Kim. You mentioned that we have a lack of planning for the next pandemic, and we've heard from the medical community that it's not a question of if, but when. With nearly 500,000 cases of COVID in New York City and up over 25,000 deaths here, and we know that the pandemic came from a live animal market. New York has, in the 5 boroughs, we've got nearly 100 live animal markets with countless violations. The Department of Health is doing absolutely nothing about that. Would you use zoning as a way to address this problem?
What an interesting idea and question. I have not formed an opinion specifically about that particular issue, but I do think that as a whole, there should be, we should set standards for the ability of a particular market to sell, to use the science to make sure that we are not taking risks that put other people's lives in danger as a function of the food industry, of preferential, delicacies, I guess, that come from different parts of the world. It's tricky, because I think even in the most regulated sense, the idea that that something could get into our society, onto our streets, is probably still pretty high. Viruses are natural organisms. They're not going anywhere. And several years back, we knew that this was happening, which is testament to the fact that a documentary came out about a month before some of the first cases were in the country. So I don't know that it is depending on the best use of rezoning conversations that we have, I don't know that it's necessarily the best use of energies to focus just on that, but I'm a big fan of using zoning to make sure that we consider using zoning and scientific research to make sure that we take as few risks as we can in terms of looking forward to what that's going to look like. I will say, and I think this is worth noting, that we have good data. We have good data coming through syndromic surveillance that is fed in from school systems, from the schools in our school system, from clinics, and from the hospitals that show where there are spikes in something called ILI, influenza-like illnesses. When people start, coming in with fevers and abnormalities, and we see spikes, our epidemiologists, our infectious disease specialists, they should be on it, and I know that they're on it. The disconnect was that political voices did not communicate to people in our city appropriately when this started to happen. We would have been a lot more prepared with the communication lines more stronger, and we have more trust in our government, but we don't, and we didn't, and that's why we need to make sure we've got better plans.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. I think that's about all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
Great. All right, thanks everybody for joining the Borough President and Comptroller Forum. That was our last candidate, and I'll hand it over to Cam and Mar if you have any closing remarks.
Sure. I mean, I just echo the same thing. Thank everybody for coming. You guys helped make it an excellent forum. We look forward to seeing you guys at our meetings, our respective clubs.
Thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.